Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first DFSA Cyber Risk Forum. Today, we will be talking on how to remain resilient in the era of transformation and disruption. My name is Maciej Linke, and I am Senior Manager responsible for Business Technology and Cyber Risk Supervision at the DFSA, and I'm honored to be your MC today. Today's program, as you can see on your screen, will run for 3 hours. We will start with the opening remarks from the DFSA. Then we will hear from our keynote speaker on the threat landscape. We will then have our first panel discussion on the impact of innovation, digital transformation, and COVID-19 on cyber risk. Then we will have our second presentation for today titled Resiliency, Cybersecurity, and Time, Racing with the Adversary. The second panel of the day will focus on the discussion on what financial institutions should be doing to prevent and respond to cybercrime. We'll then have the third presentation titled Protecting Trust Across New Frontiers, Expanding Security Throughout an Evolving Ecosystem. Then we will have a short presentation from the DFSA, following by a few closing remarks. There will be opportunities for you to ask questions during different portions of the event. If you have a question, you can type it where you see the question mark. If you are on the laptop, it will be on the right-hand side of your screen. If you are on a mobile device, it will be in the tray at the bottom of your screen. There are more than 460 people registered for this event, so we won't be able to get everyone's question, but we'll do our best and get to as many as we can. That was your summary for today. I would like to kick off today's event by inviting Brian Steirold, the Chief Executive of the DFSA, to give some opening remarks. Brian, over to you. Brian, you are muted. Please unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think you can see me, but anyway, I'm going to continue with the opening remarks. So first off, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first edition of the DFSA Cyber Risk Forum. Let me start by saying thank you for making the time to join us for this event, especially to our speakers, panelists, and moderators. As 2020 was set out by the government as the year we prepare for the next 50 years in the UAE, this is a great topic to begin our journey. We've assembled a great set of speakers for the event, but most importantly, we can all look at ourselves as partners in driving this agenda forward. As we consider many possibilities for technological advancement, operational resilience, including cyber risks, operational resilience is one of the most important topics that I see in front of us for the foreseeable future. I'm proud of our team's efforts to push this topic forward in an attempt to address the many challenges that this topic presents. Last week, we hosted the second edition of RegTech Live, where we talked about technological innovation and digital transformation in reshaping business overall, but specifically in financial services, and even more specifically in governance, risk management, and compliance. It is not a coincidence that we are holding this Cyber Risk Forum immediately following the RegTech Live event. Technological innovation and digital transformation has accelerated rapidly in 2020, far more rapidly than we envisioned at this time last year, and we are not nearly done yet. While this brings many efficiencies, it also brings new risks, particularly exposure to cyber risks. The more we innovate, the more complex our critical information systems become. And the more complex our systems become, the more potential vulnerabilities we create. And the more sophisticated we become in our defenses, the more sophisticated the attackers become. And this cycle goes on and on. As a consequence, even the best defenses cannot eliminate completely the risk of a successful cyber attack. To those individuals and institutions that are confident in their defenses, and those defenses being impenetrable, I would remind you there remains one very low-tech element that exposes institutions to the highest probability of a cyber incident, and that is people. When you're assessing the complexity of your critical systems and deploying advanced defense mechanisms, don't forget to account for the human factor. Cyber risk has just as much to do with people management and behaviors as it does with software and hardware. In this globally connected world, we are not only at risk through our own business activities and the people within our own organization, but we are exposed to cyber risk of our business partners, our clients, and our counterparties. An attack that impacts one of us is an attack that threatens all of us. So what can financial institutions do? Clearly, the priority is to prevent a cyber incident from occurring, but it is a question of when rather than if a cyber incident will occur. Therefore, it is vital to have an effective response strategy to ensure that attacks can be quickly detected, analyzed, and responded. Knowledge sharing and industry collaboration is also important to stay ahead of the curve. Similar to their effectiveness in fighting financial crime, public-private partnerships are critical to cyber prevention and response strategies. At the DFSA, over the past 3 years, we've been steadily increasing the intensity of our cyber risk supervision program by focusing our reviews on cyber risk governance, hygiene practices, and resilience capabilities. Very importantly, these efforts support the UAE cybersecurity strategy and Dubai cybersecurity strategy and are designed to strengthen the cybersecurity environment in the DIFC. In October of last year, we launched an online incident reporting mechanism for authorized firms to report cyber incidents to the DFSA. The objective of the mechanism is to provide the DFSA with consistent reporting of incidents, to make clear to firms what information the DFSA expects to receive, and to provide the DFSA timely information with which to assess the potential for systemic impact. Also in October of last year, we hosted our first in a series of cyber roundtables. Constant and open communication has been, is, and will be a key pillar of the DFSA in fulfilling our regulatory objectives. The purpose of these sessions is to deepen our understanding of the challenges firms face in maintaining effective cybersecurity, and we will do more of these sessions in the future. In January of this year, I'm proud to say that we launched the DFSA Threat Intelligence Platform. The platform is the region's first regulator-hosted cyber threat intelligence platform, and you'll hear more about that platform at the end of today's discussion. So for now, I will just say that I encourage all DFSA authorized firms and DIFC registered companies to use the platform. In April of this year, we hosted our first threat intelligence workshop. The workshop was for companies that had registered to use the threat intelligence platform, and the purpose was to assist them in understanding how to use the platform and how to use the threat intelligence that's available from it. In June, we published the findings of our cyber thematic review. The objective of the review was to identify overall maturity level of cyber security programs in the authorized firms, and I think we were successful there. This month, we posted to our website our approach to cyber risk supervision, and shortly, we will publish a set of cyber risk guidelines. Today, we're going to hear from a number of industry experts about what the current cyber threat landscape looks like, including the impact of innovation, digital transformation, and COVID-19 on cyber risks, best practices in protecting from and responding to cyber incidents, transaction monitoring, and fraud detection, and what we should be doing to protect our own environments. And finally, you'll be hearing the DFSA's views on cyber risk. I will leave you with one final thought, which I briefly mentioned earlier. Cyber risk is not just an IT problem. It is a problem for the whole organization. And it is not just an organization's problem. It's a problem for the whole industry. The only way to effectively address this problem is through a collective effort of public-private partnership, collaboration, and information sharing. And that is why we're here today. So with that in mind, that concludes my remarks, and I'd like to now introduce our keynote speaker. It is a pleasure to introduce Mr. Alex Hinchcliffe from Palo Alto Networks. Alex is a threat intelligence analyst at Unit 42 of Palo Alto Networks. His main responsibilities include research into threats, the groups behind them, and their motivation and tactics. He regularly speaks on these and related topics and participates in many public and private industry working groups. He started his career as an intern at Dr. Solomon's antivirus company in the UK, and while at McAfee Labs, Alex co-created the industry's first cloud-based anti-malware reputation system. So Alex, welcome to you, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is healthy and doing well in these times. Thank you for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here today to present at the DFSA Cyber Risk Forum. So thanks for the organisers in setting it up and for the invitation as well. So as was mentioned, my name is Alex Hinchcliffe. I'm a threat intelligence analyst at Unit 42 at Palo Alto Networks, and I was delighted to be asked to keynote at this event. And for the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to give you our perspective on the cyber threat landscape. There may be time for some Q&A at the end if there are any questions, but if not, then I'll try and answer them offline on the platform by text. Okay, so hopefully you can see all the slides, and I'm moving through them now. The agenda today is pretty simple. I'm going to quickly introduce Unit 42 in case you don't know who we are and what we do. And then the main presentation is obviously about the cyber threat landscape, and I've put it in two categories. One is by numbers, so we've got some statistics, and then by stories as well, a few different stories to talk about. Of course, the cyber threat landscape is pretty vast. There's so much we could talk about. So hopefully what I've condensed into this presentation should, raise your cyber awareness and hopefully give you some pointers in your journey as to things you could think about to better protect yourselves and the networks that you operate. So the mission for Unit 42 is on the screen now, and it's effectively that we want to analyze all the data that we have available to us at Palo Alto Networks, and that's to identify who the bad people are, the adversaries, what their motivations are, so why they're trying to attack people, and then what kind of resources and tactics, techniques, procedures that they're using in order to do that. As we know more about these threats, of course, we improve our products, we improve our protection for our customers, but we also share as much as we can with the wider public, and including, as Brian mentioned, with the threat intelligence platform at the DFSA, we've been sharing for many months now some of the research we do at Unit 42 through their MISP platform. In terms of where our data comes from, a lot of it comes from our customers, whether it's firewalls, endpoint, whatever it might be, but we do get a lot of open source intelligence and the partnerships that we have with CERT, law enforcement, DFSA and other organizations like that. So that's where a lot of our research comes from. Okay, so moving into the cyber threat landscape and starting with the numbers first. So I'm going to show 4 charts that have been generated from our data for the last month and talk through a few of the interesting trends and statistics about them as well. So starting with actors and looking at this data, looking at the number of samples we've seen by actors, by far the biggest volume, the biggest piece of that pie chart is attributed to an actor called TA551, similar to TA505 and others that you may have heard of. They're quite prevalent in terms of sharing commodity malware and threats. So to name a few, things like Valak, ICID, GrandCab, and things like that. So information stealers, and also sometimes ransomware. Some other threats we see in that commodity market space, where it effectively gets spammed out to as many people as possible to try and infect as many people as possible, include things, they're quite blended. And actually, once you've got one infection, it could well bring down a second infection or a second or third piece of malware, each of which have different intentions or motivations as to what to do with your system. And sometimes these systems which are compromised can also be sold on to other groups to do what they want with them as well. The next biggest chunk in that pie chart is the Tor to Mine, a threat actor that we track, effectively named like that because they use Tor to Web services to effectively try and obfuscate where their traffic is going, and they deploy XMRig and other crypto mining software once they've compromised systems. The reason this is so prevalent is because it's often coupled with bots, and so once the bots are spreading and they're infecting lots of systems, it's fairly easy to deploy something like crypto mining software which is actually quite benign. You know, it's just mining cryptocurrency. It doesn't really have an impact like ransomware on your system, although it could take up valuable resources like CPU time. We're seeing a lot of that activity, crypto mining activity, in the cloud now, for a couple of reasons. One is there's a decent amount of compute power there, so you can imagine running software in the cloud is good for the bad guys. And also, I think the maturity of cloud security is still yet to be achieved. So we're seeing misconfigurations and basic credential issues, lack of multi-factor authentication, and various other things leading to compromise of cloud systems. And then the rest of that pie chart is made up with mostly nation-state activity, threat actors that we track, and they could be from China, from the Middle East, from other areas of Asia, and other places as well. The second chart here is by file type, and the vast majority of this pie chart is taken up by PE, or portable executable files, and the next chunk is PE64 for 64-bit operating systems. So really, the vast majority of malware that we still see is targeting Windows. The vast majority still uses things like executables to run, although we are seeing lots of things like PowerShell scripts and other things being used as well. But effectively, the vast number of the PE file kind of dwarfs the other file types, including things like weaponized Office documents. The third chart is by exploits, and the largest one here is Office-based, so it's a PowerPoint vulnerability that's being used. And there are some others in that pie chart as well that relate to Office, like the 2017 11882, the equation editor vulnerability. And the second largest one there is for a Huawei router. So this is something that we're seeing more of nowadays, that IoT devices like routers and security cameras and other things are being targeted, and often they can be quite vulnerable. They're on the network, so it makes them fairly easy targets. They don't have to be locally exploited, if you like. And the Huawei router one especially is, you know, leveraged by things like Mirai and Satori botnets, which are vast in numbers. They try and spread across the network and the internet and infect devices like this. In terms of malware type, the fourth chart that's coming up there, the vast majority of this chart is attributed to worms, and by their nature, worms can be quite prevalent, just because once they've infected a system, it's their job to scan the network and to find other vulnerable systems on that network and beyond, to infect and spread again and so on. So a bit like, I guess, WannaCry with the Eternal Blue vulnerability, or a bit like some of the old MyDoom worms, things like that, that are still bouncing around the internet. Worms do show up as being quite prevalent. The next one there is crypto miners. In terms of prevalence, and I've talked about that before, but with the exchange rates as they are at the moment, it's very lucrative for threat actors to use crypto miners to make money. The compute resources there, the exchange rates in their favor, so it's a good business model. The one I'd like to call out here in this chart is ransomware. The tiny slither of like 1.2% of the samples we saw in October for ransomware, I don't think does it justice. It's a massive problem, and it seems to be getting worse. There's lots of news reports at the moment of organizations which are being targeted with this kind of new breed of ransomware, which is more targeted at organizations. We call it post-intrusion ransomware. So once the network has been breached, instead of a traditional kind of data leak or exfiltration of company data, we're seeing lateral movement and spreading across the network by the threat, and then a deploying of ransomware to compromise and encrypt and effectively render useless as many systems as possible, and then ask the organization for a fairly large ransom. So families like Riot, Conti, Wasted Locker, Maze, Ecans, those malware families are the ones which are a big problem at the moment. So even though ransomware is small on that chart, don't take it for granted. It's a big problem. I would also add to that there are some sophisticated techniques which are coming out with these new ransomware families for doing as much damage as possible to the network. And that includes things like having wake on LAN features, so that once the malware is on the network and it has admin credentials, it will actually broadcast to the network to wake up any systems connected but offline, so that it has more victims and more machines to encrypt. we're also seeing a similar thing where it scans the network and tries to find as many machines as possible. So they really are looking to find as many assets as possible, encrypt them all at once, and render the business useless. Okay, so moving on to the second part of the threat landscape by stories. So I've got 3 stories to talk about today. One is Steganography, which is effectively trying to hide data or information within an image or other file like a document. And this is being used by a threat actor recently in their command and control communications to smuggle the traffic out. And the second story is a MITRE attack technique, T1187, and I'll talk about that afterwards. And I'm sure you know about MITRE attack, but it's a very useful framework for discussing how behaviors occur and how threats materialize on the network and on the endpoint, how they're delivered, how they're installed, and so on. So I'll talk about one of those techniques. And then finally, tunneling, not the kind of tunneling under a country's border to move drugs around, but on a similar kind of vein, DNS tunneling. So smuggling, again, traffic out under the radar, if you like, through using a protocol like DNS in order for the actors and the threats to communicate to each other. So the first story then, Steganography, concealing a message inside a file, like a video file. The reason for this particular image on the slide is this is the Windows 7 bitmap file that's used for the guest user account on a Windows system. And it's this image that was used by the attackers to conceal their command and control. So this story relates to a recent case that we found, but from a well-known threat actor that we've been tracking since at least 2016 that we call OilRig. And they use various different command and control methods or C2 methods, including communication over DNS tunneling, HTTP, and now this novel technique that actually used Exchange Web Services. So it sent emails to use for C2. So just a quick summary about this threat actor: espionage motivated adversary operating in and around the Middle East, possibly state sponsored. I think the Americans have attributed this to the Iranian government. Our stance isn't that solid, but we agree with some of their information. It's probably one of the first espionage groups to use weaponized malicious macro delivery documents, and they do lots of custom tool development. They're fairly innovative. As I mentioned, they use DNS tunneling for C2. They use VirusTotal quite often for doing their testing to check, how many vendors are detecting their threats and so on. They're fairly prevalent. So we saw about a year or two ago now, there was actually a leak of data from someone about that threat group, OilRig, and related groups. It was on Twitter, it was on Telegram, and there was various pieces of information and binaries and samples that were leaked. We gathered all that information so that we could compare it with our own findings and our own research over the years. And this is the kind of summary of what we know about OilRig at the moment. So a few key points, starting up in the top right. In that dump, there were lots of credentials, so tens of thousands of credentials from multiple victims, including full Active Directory dumps for some organizations. So they were definitely heavy on stealing credentials and using it for various methods. On the bottom left, in the bottom left of this slide, the web shells. So we see from the dump and from our own information, about 87 organizations were affected, and over 100 different web shells were deployed at various different organizations. The highest point on that chart relates to the government sector, so that was the biggest target for them, and the most web shells deployed in government organizations. But we also saw a real mix: telecoms, transport, logistics, and others as well. And in total, in terms of global attacks on the bottom right there, about 27 countries, 18 industries, and almost 100 different victim organizations. And that was slightly more than we ever knew about this group. But again, the data that we have and the visibility we have comes down to those sources I mentioned before. So the leak of information really helped us better understand this group and what they're doing. So one of the tools they use is called RDAT. It's a backdoor Trojan, one of many different ones that are used by the group. And we've known about this one for a few years, but it does evolve over time, like most threats. And a recent sample that we saw included, as well as the standard DNS and HTTP C2, we saw it communicating with Exchange, Microsoft Exchange web services. So it uses the credentials of the compromised system, or ones that it's probably stolen before, to communicate to the EWS server. And once it's there, it effectively communicates with the threat actors using email instead of these other mechanisms. So at first, it will create a rule in the Exchange web services to effectively move anything from email addresses that it's interested in, i.e. the threat actors, the people commanding and controlling the malware, into the junk email folder, just to move it out the way, so that if anyone is still accessing their email, it's not totally suspicious. It also then creates another rule, or regularly polls the Exchange service looking for emails from a particular sender that have attachments and that are in that junk email folder. And assuming they have, assuming there's a match, it will then process that email. And there's an example here of an email that has a bitmap attachment, and it will save that attachment, process it, get the command that's hidden using steganography, process the command, and then encrypt that back up using steganography into an image, attach it to an email, and send that back to the actor. And again, some of this stuff is done because it's relatively benign. You know, emails are flying around all over the place, so you know, sending a few extra ones probably won't cause too much trouble. So these images here are the before and after. Before being the original, and after being once the steganography encoded message is added to the image. And it's pretty hard to tell, I'd say, you know, just by the human eye, that something is different. We've tried to zoom in on the first row of pixels in that image there, and then you've got the 2 rows at the bottom. It's actually the bottom row that has the hidden data in. And if you look very closely, you can see a slightly different shading of the pixels as you move along. And that's the different data that's been added and encoded into the image. So we look at the encoding logic. I don't want to get too technical, but effectively, once they've got their data in that first row, they base64 it, encode it into that second row, and every character that they want to smuggle out, so that's O, C, W, 1, N, D, N, that whole line, each single byte is split across multiple bytes. Bits within those bytes, so that effectively it's more subtle. So by spreading that data across, the impact on the original image is very minor, and thus, you know, very difficult to visualize and spot. So fairly, you know, steganography is fairly sophisticated anyway, but instead of just crudely putting overwriting data of the image and making it very easy to spot, they're very, you know, using a more sophisticated method to spread that data out and encode it. Okay, so the second story, this MITRE attack technique, T1187, the forced authentication, effectively, and some of you may have, you know, Googled it if you didn't know what it was when I first mentioned it, but it's effectively when a Windows system attempts to connect to an SMB, or service message block resource, like another Windows host, a Windows server, or even some kind of remote network resource. As long as it's attempted over SMB, Windows will automatically send the username of your machine, of your host, plus the password hash. So not the password in plain text, but a hash of that password over the network to that remote host to try and authenticate to it. So what we've seen is threat actors trying to leverage this feature, if you like, in malicious means. So we've got one example here of HTML or a website where you could have a watering hole or a compromised web system. And if anyone browses to that website from a Windows host and it contains code like this, it will do what I just said and share your username and password hash to that remote IP 1.1234 in this case. And all that HTML is doing is asking the web browser to download a file, an image from that location, but because it's using the file // notation, the SMB notation, and not a HTTP notation, it forces Windows to use that protocol, SMB protocol, and share the data with the remote host. Same on Office. So if you receive a kind of weaponized Office document as part of a phishing attack, it's quite common for it to include macros and to run malware and code on your system to infect you, but actually it could do other things. In this case, it's trying to download another template from a remote location, but forcing it over the SMB protocol, and again, sending your data. In that case, in the case of the Word document, you may actually see a pop-up like this because the authentication failed, and you may enter your credentials and effectively give them for free to the attackers. But hopefully, if you spot the domain name there, it looks a bit suspicious, outlook.net with 2 zeros instead of 2 O's. And essentially what you would be sending is data that looks like this. So in this case, it was the admin user in our test, and that's the hash of the password for that user. And those hashes can be used in like a replay attack, or potentially decrypted if there's enough compute power. But sharing that data is tipping your hat a lot to whoever wants that information. We saw one use case of this, well, multiple use cases, but there was one use case documented by the US CERT a couple of years ago, a Russian adversary, Dragonfly, that was attacking the critical national infrastructure in Russia. Instead of using the HTML that I mentioned from the website or the Office document version that I mentioned, this particular one used shortcut LNK files. And those LNK files contain a lot of information, and you can set the LNK file to pick up a unique icon from somewhere, including a network resource. So lo and behold, you can see here an icon is being downloaded from a remote IP address using the / SMB notation. So if anyone browsed a Windows Explorer folder using Windows Explorer, it would render the LNK, parse it, contact that server for the icon, and in doing so, share your username and password hash as well with the attacker's infrastructure. So certainly a very interesting technique where we're seeing it used a bit more at the moment, and it's a very easy way to get hold of people's credentials. So the final story is the DNS tunneling one. We saw some attacks against a Kuwaiti government and also a shipping and transport organization in 2018. It started, and we saw multiple attacks in 2019 against the shipping organization. The campaign that we've termed this is called X-Hunt, and we believe it does have some relationship with some of the infrastructure in the attack tools and TTPs that we've seen with that previous actor, Oil Rig, as well, but it's still being investigated as to whether those ties are solid. But essentially, we have been tracking this as the campaign X-Hunt, and we've seen more recent activity this year as well against similar targets. So this campaign used multiple different tools, backdoors, password stealers, brute force attack tools, and various other things. And strangely, they all had their own names. So in the source code and in the comments, they all had their own names. And these were the names. And the only relationship we could find was with a Japanese manga anime series called Hunter x Hunter, which is why we called it X-Hunt. So not sure why, but the developers, the threat actors of who developed these tools, maybe liked this series, and they called their tools after those. They also included some information about the change log, about what was being updated in those tools, and that was useful for us to see. And it also included information about the Exchange web service that I was talking about before, and also about the fact that they're trying to bypass some of our software on the endpoint. So it highlights the focus some of these threat actors have against their victims, that they try and understand as much as they can about who the victim is, what software they're using, and potentially how they could bypass this. So the tool that I'm talking about here is Hisoka, but the real story that I want to get across here is the DNS tunneling piece. DNS, I think, is a very overlooked protocol. You just enable it, or it's on by default, because everyone needs to survive with DNS, because we can't remember numbers, we need to have names. And so often DNS is actually one of the protocols that's always open everywhere. In this particular case, an example query that was sent out from the malware on the victim system looked like a relatively benign looking DNS query to a domain windows64x.com with some random characters at the start, probably to throw off investigation systems and researchers, and then some information about the victim themselves. And the response from the server in this case was 92.2.0.0, where 92 meant download and execute a command, and 2 represents the number of queries that have to be sent. So the malware gets that response. It now sends 2 queries back to the server, which are done here. And because this is DNS with UDP, there's no guarantee the queries will get there, so they have their own sequence number in the queries, 100, 101, 102, and so on. And the 2 queries that were sent responded with what looks like an actual IP address, but it's simply converted from ASCII to decimal. So if you convert it back the other way, you see the text, who am I? And that's the command that the threat actors want the malware to run on the client side. It's going to take 3 queries to send that data back up to the client. The malware tells the threat actors it's going to take 3 queries, and then it sends these 3 queries with the data that's encoded here, which when decoded is the host name of the system and the username that's logged on. So it seems like quite a long-winded way of doing things, but it's a very elegant way of smuggling traffic and information out and also receiving commands back in. And there are numerous different ways for DNS tunneling to work, but this is the one, by this threat actor at this moment. So just to wrap up, those 3 stories that I've talked about. So Oil Rig was using bitmap files with Steganography to smuggle traffic. So from a security point of view, one of the things of many that you could do is look at file blocking policies. As a business, if you don't use bitmaps and you don't need them, prevent them from going across the network. And that's a fairly simple way of dealing with that. For the MITRE ATT&CK technique, the forced authentication of sharing information over SMB, there's no need really for SMB or WebDAV to go out of the network onto the internet, and likewise very little reason for it to come in to the network. So make sure you're blocking those types of applications and you'll prevent that data from being leaked, which is simple. And then finally, for the DNS tunneling, as I mentioned before, it's a very overlooked protocol. I think it can be used a lot for kind of exfiltration of data and this command and control mechanism. So at the very least, you should be logging it and monitoring it for suspicious looking patterns and queries. And if you can, use some kind of security tool on top that will do the checking for you, not just if a domain is good or bad, but also whether something looks like it's DNS tunneling, then you should use that for protecting your network as well. And that's it. Thank you very much again for your time. It's been a pleasure to be here to talk about the cyber threat landscape from a Unit 42 perspective. If I see any questions, I'll stay online and answer them, but otherwise enjoy the rest of your conference today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex, for that very informative presentation and your insightful views on the current cyber threats. As Alex said, if you have any questions, please use the question functionality. Just click the question mark and you can ask Alex about anything related to his presentations. And right now, well, that was only the beginning. Now it's time for our first panel of the day, the impact of innovation, digital transformation, and COVID-19 on cyber risks. The panel will be moderated by Will Brown, Director, Head of Crisis Resilience and Cyber Consulting and Controlled Risk. Will, I will let you introduce yourself and 4 panelists that we invited today.
Thanks very much indeed, Maciej, and welcome everybody, and thank you for participating in the session. My name is Will Brown. I am head of cyber consulting for control risks in the Middle East. I've been involved in technology and resilience, specifically technology resilience, for over 20 years, going back quite a long time, back to backup tapes, etc. But we probably less talk about that better. What I'd like to do is to introduce my fellow panelists. I'd like to start with Dr. Bushra Al-Balushi. She's head of research and innovation for Dubai's Electronic Security Center. She's got over 15 years experience across different industries and is currently a member of several committees and panels and advisory boards, both nationally and internationally. Welcome, Doctor. Ahmed Abdul from AIG. He is head of financial lines for AIG. He's been working in financial lines for over 9 years and has extensive relationships across insurance and reinsurance. and within that period, he has worked in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and in Lebanon. Bipin Mehta from HSBC is head of cybersecurity for the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey, and part of the front line and first line of defense for HSBC. And he has got 20 years experience in both banking, information security, technology, and information governance. And last but not least is Yasser Tasson, who is joining us from Microsoft. He is a security and compliance specialist working across EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. And he helps clients adopt cloud solutions and strengthen security. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, for joining. We are here today to talk about the impact of innovation, digital transformation, and COVID-19 on cyber risk. Obviously, there's quite a lot of buzzwords in there, and we've seen in the last 8 to 9 months some fairly extraordinary times. I think I'm not going to use the words we've all talked about on a frequent basis, but what I do want to do, and I'm going to put the first question out to the panel, is we understand that remote working and sort of working from home arrived suddenly. It wasn't necessarily non-foreseen. We'd obviously seen the pandemic emerge in China and in the Far East, and obviously it came to us over the course of the next 2 to 3 months. But I really would like to understand from the panelists in the first instance what the acceleration of remote working implementation meant for you, and specifically with your organization. So the kind of the internal view of moving to remote working, and then we will go out to talk about the market view and what happened subsequently. So Bipin, if I could start with you from an HSBC point of view, and if you could just talk us through some of the challenges that came with this rapid acceleration, if there was a rapid acceleration for you guys. Bipin, could you take off mute, please? Bipin, I still can't hear you. Can anybody else hear? Okay, fine. Bipin, we'll come back to you in just a moment. Yes, sir, from a Microsoft point of view, from your internal workings.
Sure. So actually, a part of my job is actually to work with customers to put a strategy for them to actually harden their security posture without impacting their productivity. So basically, the very first thing that comes to mind of customers in general that I work with, am I going to lose control over my organization when I go to cloud or not? Okay, and by going to cloud, are they going to harden their security posture or not? This is the second question that they usually ask. But basically, what we have seen throughout the previous period is that the cybersecurity solutions with cloud vendors have actually accelerated the adoption of cloud more than 5 times that we have expected. Basically, all our customers, they own their data and they make sure that they have the full visibility and control on it. Actually, all what I wanted to say is the challenges of cybersecurity and cyber risk based on COVID, and this is part of your question, it has increased massively. We have seen many phishing campaigns coming across our platform, our email gateway. So just to let you know, a very simple statistics, Microsoft managed to stop around 8 billion phishing email since 2018 that came across our data center. So this is a very, very high number, and to be able to manage such organization, we need to make sure that the right solutions are implemented. So that's in a brief in answer to question, Will, if you can allow me.
Yes, could I ask very, very quickly how from your internal working point of view, so working within the corporate environment of Microsoft, how did the arrival of COVID accelerate remote working? Were you already an organization that was highly dependent on that? Were there any significant challenges for you as an organization? And we'll come back to obviously the very important elements around attacks, etc. in a moment.
So basically, I've been working at Microsoft since 2015. Okay, so I've been there for almost 6 years. Since I joined Microsoft, I've been working from home almost for 2 to 3 days on average. Sometimes I can work for a full complete month since 2015, totally from home. So such flexibility was available at Microsoft. We are used to such virtual meetings. We're used to even to report to manager who are not sitting at the same country. However, it requires just having the right set of solutions in place to make sure that you are able to communicate, you are able to track the behavior of the users, and also you are able to secure your organization. So we at Microsoft, we have 200,000 employees roughly. So let's say I personally have 3 laptops, but let's imagine that we have 200,000 devices only. We have only 35 security analysts worldwide covering the 200,000 employees, which is actually very efficient, and with the right tools in place that we're using, they are able to secure such a very big organization internally with very few number of resources relatively to other organizations.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. And that's really interesting. I mean, obviously, that's a pretty efficient team if you look at the number of employees. Bipin, can I ask you? Hooray. Hi.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Sorry about the false start, but yeah, thank you, William, and good afternoon, everyone. So definitely, I think Yasser's made some very good points. From an HSBC perspective also, I think the ramp up had to be done immediately, as everyone knows. Yeah, it was literally overnight that we had to, and we have an equal number of employees, more than 230,000 worldwide. Ensuring that all of them are able to work from home was not a mean feat, right? So you had, luckily for us, all the technology that's required for work from home, as Yasser mentioned, is not new technology. It's something which has gone through due diligence. It's gone through rigorous testing, and also for security features, security vulnerabilities, much before in the previous years. I think we have to understand also that the ramp up required a lot of people to work in similar circumstances. The technology, the engineers who are also in the same environment as us, who are also facing the same threats, who are also facing lockdown issues, who are also facing a lot of pressure, had to operate very quickly to ramp up this infrastructure to ensure that all of us would work from home. So I think shout out to everyone, and you know who you are, who've actually done that, spend nights and days making sure that everyone could start working from home. It's very important to call out those. So I think, so that was the first stage. The ramp up was risky because it had to be done very quickly. You had to put in a lot of technology. Luckily, due diligence was already done. I think the risk is in the volumes. Because the volumes are huge, the number of people using this technology is huge, the footprint is huge. That's where the second stage came in. Once it's all running, and we can't be complacent now, we have to be equally vigilant. Now that all of this is running, all of us are still working from home, that environment needs to be constantly scanned, the frequency of checking has to increase, the monitoring has to be enhanced. So that's the mode we are in currently. We can't let our guards down. And of course, the traditional models of defend in depth have been challenged. It's no longer perimeter, external network, internal network. Now it's home Wi-Fi, home network, your personal device, your mobile device, BYOD. All of that has to be considered because all of those contribute to the volumes, as Yasser mentioned. Number of laptops, your phones, your personal and official devices. So yes, it's a unique, unprecedented scenario, and to keep up with that, of course, okay, I'm not supposed to say those words, but to keep up with that, we have to use extra vigilance, and that's what we definitely are currently doing and will do for some time to come.
So I was trying to avoid unprecedented or new normal, but clearly we've got one down. so that's fine.
Not again. Thanks.
So thank you very much indeed for that. I think one of the things that we've seen, and I'd like to come on and talk specifically to speak to Desk and AIG, is some of the potential leveraging of home working and what we've seen globally. And so if I could start with Desk and sorry, the Dubai Electronic Security Center, Dr. Bushra, did we see a significant increase, and I don't mean in the UAE, I mean in kind of sort of the GCC and globally in attacks manifesting from the kind of home working environment? Sorry, Doctor, you're muted. Still muted. We may have a technical problem. I will just, I will obviously, Ahmed, can I put that question to you from an AIG point of view? Did you see an increase in kind of attacks leveraging the kind of the COVID environment and home working?
Thank you, Will. I sincerely hope you can hear me.
You can.
Yeah, that's a great start. Just to capitalize on what my colleagues just mentioned, definitely we've seen a huge increase. So anything accelerated in nature causes vulnerabilities. So even if it was a production process, anything which you push through outside the normal time causes vulnerabilities. So how has COVID-19 affected this? I think there are two elements. One is the element from the victim. When I say the victim, I'm talking about the company, the system under attack. So employees in the end are humans, and humans by nature are more vulnerable when they are alone than they are in a group. And attackers, contrary to what most Hollywood movies would like us to say, there's nothing called as hacking from outside. 90% it's errors, omissions, and sometimes contributions from employees inside the company. So now you have all of these employees, they're sitting at home, they're isolated, you're in an unprecedented time in 2020, you have an economical distress, you have an ongoing pandemic, and you have a lot of stress going on. And yes, they are falling victim. We've seen a huge rise in COVID-19 spoofing emails. These are emails coming in about vaccines, about test results, to prey on people's fear, asking them to click the links. So definitely that has been a huge factor. Another note, I would say what COVID-19 has changed the nature of the attackers. So we have seen a trend. Previously, you have the underground hacking community, which is referred to everywhere. But now you have the international gangs who are really were resilient on drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and other activities that suddenly have come to a halt because of COVID-19. And we have seen suddenly, I say Latin America was a great example of collaboration and sharing of skills between the international gangs and the hacking community for financial results. So instead of just spoofing emails, we've seen incidences where I'd say criminal organizations approach employees, threaten them, force them to really cause that vulnerability when that email comes. We've seen cases where employees really cooperate with international gangs. I mean, all he has to do is receive that email, click that link, and really it's very hard to establish any guilt on his behalf. So yes, I'd say the pandemic has really pushed losses. I don't like to talk numbers because most of them are guesstimates. I mean, a Google search would yield something like 2019 losses at 10 billion, 2020 at 20 billion. But really, those are direct guesstimates. You still have the indirect losses. You have the people that don't report. You have the large organizations. So if someone really comes up to me now and says in 2020 the losses are 20 trillion, I don't have any grounds to object because no one really has a number. I hope that answers.
That does. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Bushra,
Hi, William. Can you hear me now?
Hello. Yes. Hi.
Great. So I think the current pandemic situation it raised like a huge exponential, extremely reliance on the digital transformation, and that as my colleague said, it happened as an unpredictable event for everyone around the globe. It's not only a specific scenario for us here in UAE. It's something that everyone around the globe is sharing. And I think it's very important, coming back to your question about the organizations and what the organizations are doing in order to, let's say, overcome the challenges that they face with the digital transformation and the current pandemic that happened at a sudden. There are three main key questions that I think it's very important for all organizations to consider. The first question is, do we have scalable infrastructure? So we got used to do our work in a certain way, in a certain manner, and we were not predicting having such a pandemic situation where everyone will be working from home and the services will be delivered online. So this is the first important question that each and every organization should now go and study back. Do we have really a scalable infrastructure where we can scale it up if another pandemic happened in future? This is the first question. Then the second question that organizations should ask themselves, do we have really a resilient infrastructure? Do we have an infrastructure that can be resilient enough and can deliver the services that the entity is supposed to deliver and guarantee that the business continuity of those organizations is maintained during the pandemic situation? So resilient is important, scaling up is important. And as my colleague said, that the pandemic opened new doors for the attackers. So we never expected that the attackers will target health sector or they will target research sectors. So that was not in the agenda previously, right? So we never expected that attackers will go to the research institutes or to the academic institutes and they will attack their data in order to get the details of the vaccines that is being developed. So those are new areas that the attackers are considering with the current pandemic. So do we have a proactive measures that are developed within the organizations to make sure that we are ready for any attack scenarios or any cyber crimes that might target those organizations? So developing, maintaining proactive measures is something that is really important to have, not for this pandemic, but even for future events that might occur. So we need to consider the pandemic as an opportunity, actually, to improve our cybersecurity rather than as a challenge. So it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for everyone. It's an opportunity for all the sectors to improve their cyber resilience skills and capability.
No, thank you very much indeed for that. Yes, I think there's possibly a concept out there that all of the kind of the cyber criminals were basically just out for financial gain. And yeah, you're absolutely right that we've seen a much more diverse kind of array of sectors being targeted and targeted significantly over the course of the last 9 months. I'd like to move on and just sort of raise a point. If anybody does have any questions for any of the panelists, please do use the question function. I'd like to move the question on, and I fear that we could talk about this for a very long time. So I will kindly ask everybody to be as reasonably concise as we can. But really, one of the things that we've seen, and the situation with COVID-19 has absolutely accelerated digital transformation. In some cases, accelerated isn't even the word. I think it created digital transformation for some organizations that had no intention of digitally transforming at this point. And one of the elements and kind of attributes of that is moving from on-prem capability into the cloud. And what does that mean for the organization? What does that mean for security? And so, Yasser, if we could come to you to talk about, in the first instance, about some of the considerations around that, and then Doctor, I will come back to you.
Sorry. So can you hear me clearly right now, William? I was having some glitches with my mic and my and my microphone over here. So if you can allow me just to reinforce the question again to make sure that they got the message right. So you mentioned about the risks that faced customers actually throughout the previous period based on experience. Was that the question?
So it was really around what are the challenges that your customers in this example are in migrating to cloud computing, actually specifically during this time, but it's some of the what are the issues with that, specifically looking at a security standpoint.
Sure. So basically, for when it comes to a security standpoint when moving to cloud and the challenges that they face for migration, the number one is lack of resources. So most of organizations, they feel that they would require a very big team to go ahead and manage the operations. So to have a SOC solution that's actually connected to each and every trigger point inside the organization, this requires a lot of manpower so that they can manage it effectively. However, based on what we are seeing internally at Microsoft, actually, the one analyst can manage up to 7,000 employees, right? So, and across multiple layers, because the vision that we have at Microsoft is an end-to-end security solutions across identities, devices, applications, data, and infrastructure. All of those are not 5 different solutions. They are one single solution connected together. Because at the end of the day, we have to make sure that the attack kill chain is managed end to end with no gaps in the middle. So we have what we call the intelligent security graph, where signals are shared between different solutions. So they allow our customers to go ahead and have one single dashboard that is showing them actually that's showing them the insights about the alerts on different trigger points over one single dashboard, whether it is coming from email, whether it's coming from your login, whether it's coming from your devices. All of them will come up over one single dashboard. That's when it comes to a customer's hosting actually his data and having his solutions from Microsoft. But what are other customers who are having non-Microsoft solutions? Microsoft is actually having a cloud native SIEM solution that can connect to any of your systems, to your databases, to your applications, to your infrastructure, so that you can have this in a centralized way to manage it. So, like what I've mentioned, the very first thing is the lack of resources and the myth of having a big team to be able to manage the organization in an effective way. If we're gonna tackle the next point, it's gonna be the deployment itself. So people think that deploying such cybersecurity solutions requires an expert in each and every aspect of it. However, all what I wanted to mention here, cloud computing in general has made it very, very easy to have software as a service that can actually defend your organization. And over any cloud provider, they are having a very big team that's working internally in the data centers on those security products. Such internal team in whichever cloud provider, I'm not talking about Microsoft, will be part of your team. We at Microsoft, we have 3,500 people who are just working internally to manage the operations of such security solutions. Those employees will become your security team because you are getting it as a service regardless from which cloud provider you're getting. So the deployment, actually having a software as a service for cybersecurity, made it very, very, very easy to manage. The last thing is the adoption of such workloads. So basically, we need to understand the different personas inside each and every organization to be able to understand how the different cybersecurity solutions will work for them. We have high-risk profiles inside the organization, for example, where we need to make sure that there is an insider risk platform that's tracking them as well, because the insider risks footprint is increased big time these days. So 53% of organizations, and this was a report from Cybersecurity Insiders, Actually, 53% of organizations experienced an insider attack in the last 12 months. So we need to make sure.
Could I stop you there? Something I actually want to come back to in just a moment. Mr. Bushra, that is from your point of view in terms of some of the challenges with migrating to cloud. Is there anything you'd like to add at this point?
No, those 3 points only.
Sorry, Doctor.
Yeah, so from a regulator, I will talk from two hats here, from a government organization hat as an employee within Dubai Electronic Security Center, and from a regulator point of view. So I prefer to talk from a regulator point of view, a regulator that is responsible for 130 government entities within Dubai, a regulator that is responsible to make sure that all Dubai visions, Dubai strategy with innovation, with the technological transformation is being maintained while security is also being considered. That was not an easy task for us, to be honest, but we started our job earlier. So we started from 2016, from the time where Dubai Electronic Security Center was established. We were having clear standard called Information Security Regulation that was mandated to all Dubai government entities to deploy and implement. And within that framework, all government entities will know what they should do, what they shouldn't do, what policies and what risk assessment methodologies that they should consider in order to guarantee that they are moving to the digital transformation or to the digital technology with the minimum risks and with the minimum security breaches. Then the next step was that we released ISR version 2, and that was in 2018. We improved our standard to Information Security Regulation version 1 in 2016, then Information Security Regulation version 2 in 2018, where we added a clear domain about cloud security and how government entities should prepare themselves whenever they consider moving their data or moving their services to the cloud environment. And it was not only that, we also take a further step where we introduced a certification scheme similar to what UK and CSC did, similar to what US did, similar to what Singapore did as well. And we were the first city in the Middle East to issue such a certification scheme. So it was a clear certification scheme where we didn't add lots of controls to reinvent the wheel on whatever international standards are doing. So we based our standard and certification on the international standards just to make the life of the cloud service providers easier and to make also the process of certification clear and fair for all cloud service providers in the city. So we did that step, and when the pandemic happened, we clearly knew who's ready from the cloud service providers to deliver the secure services to our government entities. So that was not an issue at that time because we took all the precautions from 2016 along till 2020, and that makes our lives easier, and that makes also the transformation or the digital transformation for the government entities easier.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that last point you've made is an essential one. I think one of the things that we've been seeing and obviously speaking to people in the marketplace is one of the questions that they ask is, okay, so I'm moving it into the clouds. How can I have confidence that it is going to, that my systems and data are going to be secure in that environment? And I think obviously the work that Desk has done in the run up to that gave people a lot of confidence that migration was going to be a reasonably straightforward, in inverted commas, and very importantly, a really secure environment for them to work from. I'd like to change tack slightly. One of the things that we've seen since we've all been working in sort of distributed ways is sort of the arrival of kind of innovation and automation into some more kind of traditional activities that take place. Clearly, what I'd like to do is Bipin, and I'd like to go to you. No disrespect to banking in any way, shape or form, but it does tend to be a more traditional environment than technology or telecom. So from sort of HSBC's point of view and the banking sector as a whole, how have you seen innovation and automation change things in the last 9-10 months?
Right. So if I may just use a personal analogy first, this entire period is something that you can correlate to the theory of evolution, right? So what is evolution? Evolution is when a species changes its characteristics over a couple of decades. So what has happened to us now, all of us, right? We've changed our characteristics, we've changed the way we live, we've changed the way we work under immense pressure over the last couple of months. So what that has led to is it's led to an increased adoption of innovation and other technologies in all sectors, not just the financial sector, right? So again, just to mention what I said earlier. If you look at all the innovative technologies that exist today, right? If you look at your video conferencing, what we are on right now, if you look at digital signing or electronic signatures, if you look at artificial intelligence powered chatbots, if you look at virtual assistants, and then biometrics, voice biometrics, all these technologies that the banking industry has deployed right now to make sure that our customers can execute their banking needs right from the comforts of their homes has been there for a long time. Of course, it's always been a question of adoption. That has been the challenge to overcome. Now that adoption had become a necessity. The adoption rates have increased, and that combination of this innovation and the rate of adoption has led to this transformation that we're seeing today. And not just banking. For example, once we've crossed that barrier of resistance to change, because we had to, it has become a lot more easier. And during this adoption, I believe customers have realized the benefits, that it's a lot more easier to do things that they were doing earlier. It's cost saving. It's less friction in terms of comparing how you were doing banking earlier to how you're doing it today. And they've realized that, yes, this is how, and again, to give you examples of not just banking, us as individuals in the last couple of months, I've renewed my visa, I've renewed my car registration. Government services have been fantastic, and such a pleasure to do as compared to previous years. It wasn't bad earlier, but it's just become so much easier that we wonder how would we ever go back to the old days. Similarly, so those benefits are becoming slowly obvious, and in the theory of evolution, the changes that we've made to our characteristics, the changes that we've made because of innovation, many of them will stay. When things get back to normal, and hopefully we all wish and pray that they do, this will persist. Many elements of this will persist, and that's what that's the major difference between previous years and this year. And in terms of challenges, William, I think one of the challenges, of course, is education. We've had to educate ourselves on using these new methods. We've had to educate our customers on how, firstly, to use the technology, and second, also to be aware of the risks around innovation and the usage of a modern technology and modern processes. But that's no different from if you walked into a bank many years ago, withdrew a whole bunch of cash, you put the cash in your pocket and you walked out, you immediately would be more conscious of your surroundings. You would immediately be more aware of being more careful of where do you actually go after you've withdrawn a big amount of cash. So your level of caution would increase. So similarly, when you're using digital technology, you have to increase that level of caution. You have to educate yourself on how that's done. And from an HSBC perspective, of course, we have a lot of material that we share with our customers, a lot of material we put online. We've had a lot of sessions with our corporate customers, closed sessions where we described to them, shared how we do security and how we can share best practice methods that they could implement in their organizations as well. I think that's extremely key.
Thank you very much indeed, and specifically thank you for avoiding new normal. It will persist, I think, is the right answer. One of the things that was mentioned, Ahmed, you mentioned earlier on around the sort of insider threat or the employee error point of view. One of the things that I'd just like to kind of close the session on is clearly there are three elements to cyber. We on the call clearly know this. It is people, it is process, and thirdly, and significantly, it is technology. One of the things I'd like to focus on is that people and process element that has presented, some significant challenge for us in a kind of distributed environment. Without answering Ahmed's question before I asked, it just in simple terms, in the event of somebody sending you an email with a click the link, get your COVID test results, you can't turn around to your colleague on the left. Does this look right? So it is coming down to some of that training side. So, Rahman, can I ask you to just briefly, as we run into the end of the session, to go through some of the things you've seen?
I mean, I think it's a great question. As you said, you have technology, people, and processes. So these three, they're not really equal. So you could have, let's say, medium effective technology, but great people, and it would still work. But you can't have the weak people element with the great technology, it will fail. So people remains, I would say, the most important factor. Definitely moving to the house has changed the landscape, as you said, being unknown. So you are completely right. I believe the biggest, I'd say, way to prevent cyber threats is employee training. I think this is an area which many companies now are running towards technology platforms, technology solutions, but employee training is not really being placed on the forefront. I believe this is the key ingredient really to prevent any further attacks.
No, thank you very much indeed. Bipin, do you have anything to add from your point of view?
No, I completely agree. Definitely, it's the people awareness, the education, and of course, we're talking about awareness for our own internal staff as well as awareness for our customers who consume and consume our products. That's extremely important. And of course, in terms of process and technology, from a cybersecurity and technology perspective, we have to get more agile to keep up with that pace of change. We've learned it the hard way this year. That we have to definitely ramp up the way we do our due diligence and we do our reviews of environments that have to go live. And again, I just like to call out, William, a very good example this year has been all the support that we've got from the government, from the regulators, the approvals that we've got for all the latest technology. It has actually been extremely fast, extremely easy, as long as we had the right evidences, the right due diligence. So a big shout out to them as well this year. So there are many unsung heroes, right, among the who actually helped in the people process technology ramp up this year. So they're definitely one of them.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, look, we're drawing to the end of the session. Just before I hand over to Maciej, I would like to thank you all for your participation and really fascinating insights into the different elements we're seeing in both different industries and from government and regulation point of view, from the insurance side, and clearly the solution providers who have, over the last 9 months managed to keep us talking to each other and keep us in sight. And my final point, and my colleagues that control risks will make them smile, I think, is I sincerely and heartfeltly thank all of the panelists for not using the word holistic once. We managed to avoid that in the course of this session, and I personally thank you very much indeed. So thank you very much indeed for your time. Maciej.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Will. Maybe before we finish this session, just one short question, and I would like to ask Dr. Bushra to answer to this question. Do any of desk regulations apply to DIFC firms?
As government regulator, our laws, regulations, and the standards, it applies to government and semi-government entities. So DIFC by itself is included. So if DIFC would like to cascade down that to the private sector, those standards are open. So DIFC as a regulator then can cascade down those standards and apply it to their commodities or to the entities that belongs under DIFC umbrella.
Perfect. Thank you very much for this answer, and thank you all for this interesting discussion. It was great to hear your thoughts and opinions on these topics. Next, I would like to invite Ismail Valenzuela. Ismail, as a senior principal engineer, is part of McAfee's senior technical leadership team, leading research on security operations and threat hunting in enterprise products. author and contributor of numerous technical articles and open source tools. Ismail will start the presentation in a moment. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them across during the presentation, and Ismail will answer those questions at the end. Ismail, over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope you're seeing my screen now. And thank you to the DFCA and to you for having me today, connecting from the US all the way to the Middle East. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about, obviously, the topic of this presentation, which is resilience, but also how it ties with a lot of the things that I've seen throughout my years doing incident response, doing cyber defense, and many of those years actually working around the Middle East as well. So first of all, as you've been saying, and I'm going to go through this quickly, right? You can follow me on Twitter about security. I've been doing this for quite some time, about 20 years. And even though I've been on both sides of the coin doing offensive operations, if you want, right, as a consultant, as well as on the defensive side of things, I always have this motto, you're going to see later on, think red, act blue, which essentially means that in order to be a better defender, in order to be better equipped to defend your organization, you have to think as an attacker, right? Think about the threats. So going straight into the topic of today, I was thinking about resilience. And obviously, it's such an interesting word, right? Because it has a lot of different connotations. I was paying attention to the panel before, all the good discussions about resilience and what it really means for financial organizations. But I looked at one definition that ties really well with what I want to share today. And it's about the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And if you think about it, sometimes we talk about cybersecurity in this case, and we have the assumption that we have to stop all these bad things from happening, right? And of course, we try to do our best to stop bad things from happening. But maybe is it time to redefine what success means? Is success just avoiding compromise? Because if so, we might be finding that we're failing all the time. And I think you probably agree with me, just having the feeling that you're failing every single day, that you're being surprised by attackers every single day, that's not a good motivation, right? So if you look at that definition, recovering quickly from difficulties, it's more about how do you react to these type of attacks and how you can mitigate risk. That's what we're going to really talk about. What do we see today? Well, what we see today, unfortunately, is that there is a lack of maturity in many organizations. It is true that large organizations, and especially in the financial sector, they've always taken security more seriously. So they've been pioneering many of the steps and the adoption. They've been early adopters for the technology that we use in cybersecurity and processes and regulations. But we see a growing number of attacks going towards smaller financial organizations and any other type of organization that we were talking about skills before, that have less resources, that they may have just, let's say, protection products in place. And why so? Because there is a high revenue associated to this. It's business, right? Over the last few months, I was looking right this morning at an article that explains the situation right now in the US, where hundreds of hospitals, schools, they're being attacked right now with ransomware attacks. Why those? Well, they have access to money, in this case, public money, and they have a lack of maturity, right? These are small organizations that sometimes, or maybe large organizations, but they have small IT teams, and in many cases, little or no security dedicated resources. Maybe what they have is one or two folks that they actually wear a lot of hats and they have to do a lot of different things. On top of that, what we see is that people is paying more ransoms than before, making the business even more profitable. So attackers, they don't have any problems with attacking anybody, right? Of course, they're not going to have any morals. Another thing that we see a lot, oh, we've never had an incident before. So when we talk with executives, I've done this myself for many years, sometimes we hear that, well, but I've never had any incidents before. That brings an interesting question. Question is, it's not about whether you've seen them or not, it's whether you've had them or not, right? Maybe you don't know, but you don't know that you've had some of these incidents in the past. And I've been involved with large, let's say, consulting work with financial organizations in the Middle East for years, with government, involved with financial regulations as well. And if you look under the hood to the places where you know that attackers hide, or if you're real familiar with attackers' behaviors, you see things that you didn't see before. Why? Because in most cases, there's not enough, let's say, security cameras deployed all around the environment so you can see everything that's going on. There's always blind spots. Organizations, they have invested a lot in perimeter security, right? Devices that protect their network, but they leave in a lot of blind spots with things like working from home, with mobile devices, IoT devices, and what's happening on those endpoints. Weak planning and lack of timely communication, they can be related to each other, right? What is this about? Imagine having an accident, right, and having to call emergencies, so 911, and that resulting in a lack of communication, police not talking to the emergency services, and wouldn't that be a disaster? Well, it would definitely cause an impact, right? And sometimes in human lives. Well, this is what we see with incident response, because look, it's not enough just to say, oh, I have an incident response policy. What I find a lot is that especially small organizations, they have not rehearsed any of these plans. And now when they're victims of one of these attacks, let's say, again, let's speak ransomware, because it's definitely one of the most disruptive ones, they don't know how to react. And attackers' tactics are also changing in that now attackers that are pulling off these ransomware attacks are not just demanding a ransom for these files, they're also exfiltrating the files. And many organizations are finding that even if they pay, they don't get all the files back. The attackers might be saying, well, you know what, just have some of this back, but I'm going to keep this other part just in case there is something I want from you in the future. Another problem is the lack of strategic thinking, lack of thinking in terms of threats and not vulnerabilities. We may have been told in the past, yes, we have to patch, and of course we have to patch. It's very important. But if all your focus is just compliance, patching, just vulnerabilities, you're missing the most important thing here, which is what is the threat? Of course, this aggravates when you don't have enough skills, right, and personnel, and we've talked about that. I'm going to touch on that a little bit now in the next few slides. But again, very important, the all prevent defense. What is this? Too much reliance on these devices, this software, this technology. It's going to block attacks. It's going to prevent malware. It's going to, well, does this actually work? Well, it does, but let me introduce you to a very simple model that actually talks about how to best combine prevention, detection, and reaction. Because yes, it's about all these three things together. Now, you may have heard this before, but mentally, if you have to build a model of how prevention, detection, and reaction is combined, a lot of people would think of, well, we block as much as we can, we prevent bad things from happening as much as we can. And when we cannot, then we detect and we react. So doesn't that look like a line, like in a timeline? Well, it's not how it works. This time-based security model says that prevention runs parallel to detection and response. So it is about how you combine these things together. Very simple, right? If I think about the old Wild West, and if somebody would steal one of these safes from let's say the train and take it with him, now he would have all the time in the world to just open that. It's just a matter of time. If you have a physical building that you're defending and you put high walls, big vaults, and great locks and huge doors, but there's no detection and reaction mechanism, no security cameras, no people watching the cameras, no motion sensors. I could get a big drill, and then it's just a matter of time, right? I would drill big holes, I will use explosives, I will get into that vault and get the money or the gold. And of course, you're laughing because nobody will do that, right? You wouldn't invest all this money in just prevention without adding detection. But now imagine that you have this motion sensor and it detects that I'm drilling a big hole through the wall. Motion sensor says, hey, there's somebody drilling a hole. Great. Pat yourself on the back, but now do something about it. Imagine that it takes you now 24 hours to get the people with the cops with the big guns to this bank, for example. By that time, maybe the money is gone. So it's also about time. It's all about time. So this formula says that prevention buys you time. Let's say that these prevention mechanisms give you 24 hours of protection. That means that your detection and reaction time should be less than 24 hours. Detection and reaction combined. So let me give you an example. And this is an emulation. It's part of what I do on my daily basis. I do lots of emulations. We call this purple teaming, which is the combination of red teaming, emulating an attacker, a threat, and blue teaming. So working together, right? Defenders, attackers, emulating a behavior and learning from it. And as you can see here, the purpose of the attacker, it's always going to be to push towards the right-hand side of an attack chain. So every attack has a chain, has a timeline that starts with typically reconnaissance of the victim, walking towards the right-hand side, towards exfiltration, right? Or detonating a payload, ransomware payload. The idea of the attacker is to run towards the right as fast as possible to achieve their goal. The goal of the defender to you is to try to be proactive, pushing towards the left as much as possible. What if you're able to detect and react when there is, let's say, command and control? When you find out that there is some software is beaconing out to the bad guys. Well, is it too late or not? It might be towards the right-hand side of that timeline. But if you detect the presence of the adversary early enough, it's not going only to result in less impact in your organization, it's also going to result in better intelligence that you can gather from this, you can share with others, right? That can help others to defend against this type of adversaries as well. Okay, so I'm sold, right? I want to be better at detecting and reacting, but how do you do that? Well, let me introduce you to the hierarchy of needs. And essentially what I want to show you is that it's all about maturity. You have to get the basics right in the first place. It's about having the right data about your assets. What do you have? Can you name the assets that you are defending? Many organizations cannot do that. Can you have enough telemetry, security cameras with no blind spots? Now that gives you detection. Do you have enough detection based on that telemetry? Do you have the ability to triage incidents? That means to do incident response, scoping. Once you can do that, now you can start focusing on threats and looking at attackers' behaviors, so you can start hunting these adversaries. So it's all about maturity. It takes time. How can you do that? One of the best ways of getting this or being more mature, and in my experience doing this for many years, is to do training, emulations. Do you imagine like a pilot that would try to fly a plane without having spent like so many hours doing simulations and this intensive training? Well, that's how we attempt to do cyber defense. We pretend sometimes that we're going to defend against these threats without having done any rehearsals, any training, any simulations. That's very important. As you do that, you're going to be able to mature and to get better. How do you start doing that? How can you get started? Well, you can start with public resources. I'm sharing something with you here. This is a MITRE attack model. Many people might be familiar with this in the industry, maybe you're not, but this is all about finding what are the threats out there that are applicable to you. So if you have some time today, go to this website, attack.mitre.org, and just search for financials. search for retail, whatever the industry you're interested in, you're going to see the threat groups that are active against these different businesses or these different industries. And you're going to see how they behave. What are the tactics, the techniques they use? So if you're technical, you might want to go here. If you're not, you still want to look at what are the threats out there. Who is interested in my business? And then I can share more details about this if you want, but I know there's a lot of information, but I thought it would be interesting to share with you some of the other, I've shared this in past webinars as well. A transformation plan, a 90-day transformation plan that starts with knowing your business, defining what is valuable in your organization, what is critical, defining instant response plans for these things, automating certain responses, and measuring, defining meaningful metrics. If you iterate over this, you transform, you mature your processes, you adopt the right controls, including visibility and detection. Within 90 days, you can achieve a lot of good visibility in your environment. And I've done this with many organizations, and it's a proven method. So finally, I want to leave time for questions as well. I think we need to redefine what success means. It's not just about blocking. It's not just about preventing bad things from happening. It's about resilience. And resilience is about reacting quickly, shortening detection and reaction time so you can mitigate impact. It's all about managing risk, isn't it? Just like in the financial world, right? CFO manages risk. This is risk as well. And communicating risks, which means that you have to be informed of what's going on, but you also have to share this with the community, with a community of peers, right? People in the same business or industry, sharing, for example, with DFSA, right? The threat intelligence platform that they have been using throughout this year. And of course, this means that if you don't have the resources to be that monitoring force, right? Being able to monitor those security cameras and reacting to them and sending people to do something. If you cannot do that, it might be time for you to look at maybe how to augment your capabilities through MSSP services, maybe managed detection and response services, so you can shorten your detection and reaction time. So in summary, yes, resilience is all about time. It's all about being flexible. It's all about being adaptable. That's why I like this quote from Amazing Grace Hopper, right? Saying that you need to fight this type of resistance to change. We need to be adaptable. We need to be flexible and resilient.
Thank you very much, Ismail, for this very interesting presentation. I know it's early in the morning in the US, so special thanks to you for being with us today and for your insightful presentation. Just one question from our audience, the question about monitoring and detection capabilities. So how big team do we need actually to perform this function, to perform detection and monitoring capabilities, and what skills are needed? What skills should we look for to perform this function effectively?
Very good question. So I think it's two questions actually. The first one is how big this team should be, right? And that actually depends on what I shared before. It depends on essentially your discovery on the first 30 days. So going back to that slide, first 30 days, you're going to try to discover what is important to you. Now, I didn't mention this, but a lot of organizations, they say, if I ask, for example, a CISO, what are you trying to defend? And the CISO looks at me like, I don't get it. It's like, what kind of question is that? Everything? No, that's not the answer. If you want me to defend everything, that is not possible. That's not realistic. It's not achievable. So you need to determine what your goal is. What is the problem you're trying to fix? I'm trying to avoid, let's say, this financial information to leave the organization. All right. So what is the financial information? In what places can we find it? How many people access this? What are the ingress and egress points. And then based on all of this, you're going to dimension how many people you need, right? The scope. Based on that, you're going to well, know how many resources you're going to need. If you're going to need, like, let's say 24/7 monitoring versus 9x5, not everybody may need 24/7. It all depends on this discovery exercise. In terms of skills, very good question as well. That's something I spend a lot of time doing with SANS, like training and teaching this type of skills. Today, in the world we're living in, you cannot just afford to know only about the network, or only about the endpoint, or only about cloud, or you have to know enough about all of these different technologies, including automation, because everything is code these days, right? Infrastructure is code. We have software-defined networking. It doesn't mean that you have to be an expert across all these fields, but you need to know enough about all of these different things to be able to be a good defender.
Great, Ismail. Thank you very much again. And there is more for today. I would like to introduce Braden Rudibusin, Strategic Threat Advisor for META region at CrowdStrike. Braden will be moderating the second panel discussion of the day on what financial institutions should be doing to prevent and respond to cybercrime. Braden, I will let you to introduce yourself and our 4 panelists we invited for this discussion.
Great, thank you much, and great to be here. So that's right, my name's Braden Rudibusin. I'm a threat intelligence advisor for CrowdStrike. So my main focus is threat intelligence. I work with our huge threat intelligence team, which are scattered all around the world, involved in tracking a number of different adversaries. So I'll get straight into it. We've got a very illustrious panel of experts with us here today, and I'll go through each one. So beginning with Zainab Khatib from Lochten. So Zainab is based in the DIFC, and she's leading the cyber and technology practice for Lochten MENA, the largest privately owned insurance broker in the world. She is solely dedicated to advise and help clients manage both their first and third-party cyber risks through related insurance solutions. Zainab works with clients across a multitude of industry verticals and jurisdictions. Welcome, Zainab. Next up, we have Rahman Al-Assadi. He is the Incident Response Team Leader for AE CERT, which is the Computer Emergency Response Team of the UAE. And the AE CERT aims to improve practices of information security and protect the IT infrastructure in the UAE from risks and violations, and aims to support and ensure a safer cyberspace for the residents of the UAE. Welcome. Next up, we've got Nikolai Sulling from Help AG. Nikolai is the Chief Technology Officer at Help AG Middle East. He is responsible for overseeing Help AG's professional services, support services, and technical vendor management across the region. Additionally, he is also involved in coordinating the enablement of teams and making sure they are good at delivering the technologies Help AG takes to market. Welcome, Nikolai. And then lastly, we have Jamie Gorman from MUFG. So Jamie has been with MUFG, which is a global financial group based here in the DIFC, as the local head of systems and corporate services since 2010. He specializes in project management, building design, physical security techniques, and has been developing the role of MENA cybersecurity, its application and adoption of MENA-wide frameworks. He's very proactive in promoting the human firewall experience in MUFG Bank and MENA, and the need for continuous awareness to staff and management of the evolving threats and landscape of cybersecurity. Great, so welcome everyone.
Thank you.
I'll get straight to the topic at hand, which is what financial institutions should be doing to prevent and respond to cybercrime. So as I mentioned, myself being from CrowdStrike, we track over 148 threat actors around the world. And what we've seen this year is a massive increase in e-crime related attacks. And to put this into perspective, with each state-sponsored or nation-state campaign that we uncover, we see approximately 4 e-crime intrusions. So to start things off, I'll hand it over to Nikolai actually from Help AG, just to explain what cybercrime is, and perhaps sort of explain why we are seeing such a huge increase this year. Is there a genuine threat to organizations here in the UAE? And then also, if Abdul Rahman, you could follow up after Nikolai and just give your thoughts on what you're seeing in the UAE as well, that would be great.
Yeah, so I think cybercrime is multifaceted, right? In the sense that if you look at organizations, it may be the brand that's targeted from a cybercrime perspective. It may also be more technical issues like malware and ransomware that's impacting organizations, which can also be disruption to how they do business. And then it can be down to stuff which we kind of put into the hacking category, where someone is trying to steal data information. That's kind of like the three major let's call it categories of cyber crimes, and obviously the response to each of them will be very different.
So I can add to that. Since I'm coming from AE Cert, which is part of the cert of the UAE, we deal with government entities mostly and semi-government. From our side, we usually, like for most of our cases in the financial sector, I mean, just as the previous presenter Ismail has mentioned, the financial sector, they are more proactive, or more like they are early adopters of security systems. So mostly what we see is phishing attacks and fraudsters that are trying to emulate different organizations or different personnel, and trying to get, like, for example, purchase orders, or just trying to do social engineering. So in terms of that, we also do advise entities in raising awareness with the employees, and trying to have them avoid clicking on any like suspicious email or links in regards to that.
Great, thank you. And just from your perspective, Jamie, from sort of the business side of things, Abdul Rahman was talking about spear phishing emails. Is that something that you're still seeing? Is that something that your staff are aware of? Is it still a problem?
Yeah, Braden, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. There is no doubt that phishing is definitely on the increase. We are seeing a considerable number of attempts on a regular basis, and they certainly are getting more sophisticated. I would say that there is some elements of seeing some points of spear phishing, as some of the more sophisticated emails are being directed towards our management. However, we do run specific training about spear phishing. We have a regular once a month spear phishing attack, which is done internally. It just so happened it occurred 2 hours ago. So my inbox immediately filled up with staff members saying, is this real? Is this legitimate? So we proactively, as a group MUFG, we do proactively entertain internal training for this. We see the risk as extremely realistic. It's very serious, and obviously even to be compromised by just opening an email or opening an attachment is something we've got to keep regularly reaffirming with our staff. But there is no doubt that the level of sophistication and the complications with the attacks are something that we need to make the staff more aware of each and every day.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. So just moving to you, Zainab, is that something that you see clients kind of coming to you concerned about, when it applies to e-crime and phishing in that kind of area?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you, Braden, for having me here. Happy to be with everyone on the panel. That's probably up there with ransomware as kind of the two main concerns that our clients come to us with. The interesting part about the phishing element is that it's your employees who are kind of that first line of defense. So that's where we see them actually wanting to look for a different kind of solution there, where maybe your traditional cybersecurity controls might not come into play. It's hard to stop someone clicking on a link other than through awareness, etc. So that's definitely something we've been seeing. It's been a bulk of the kind of cyber insurance claims that we've seen globally. It's absolutely geographically agnostic. There's no kind of trend amongst different regions. That's something that we see with our clients globally. Yeah.
Excellent. That's a great point. So just putting it back to Nikolai there, you know, why do institutions often fail to detect the compromised early enough, do you think? What are the challenges they are dealing with and what can they do about it?
Well, first of all, I think that the challenge is that we're all dealing with very big environments that are difficult to manage, right? So many of the people that's on the call today will probably sit and be a little bit concerned about how do they actually deal with this specific problem. And I can only echo what the other panelists said about, you know, malware still being a relatively big problem, right? Our incident response teams, they're constantly busy whenever there's a new malware. I can tell you which ones are active right now in the UAE because we get a lot of inbound calls whenever these kind of things happen. And quite often we see that the way in for the attacker had been overlooked assets that were connected to the internet. So that could be an RDP server that has been exposed. Sorry for becoming a little bit technical, but you know, sometimes, you know, there's an overlooked asset that's connecting to the internet, and the attackers were able to connect to that. Maybe it was an overlooked connection that was left by an administrator who was trying to do a workaround at a certain point of time. Unfortunately, they are successful in these things, and if they can't get through that way, you know, then email seems to be the main way into the organization. So as Jamie said, you know, this thing about testing employees on what do they potentially click on and what is their resilience towards phishing and potential malware campaigns over email, that is extremely important for any organization.
Is that what you're seeing as well, Abdul Rahman, from sort of the UAE perspective? You know, RDP connections in, especially we're all working from home now. We're seeing an increase in people connecting in remotely. So from an incident response perspective, is that kind of something you've seen as a sort of an initial attack vector?
Yes, Braden. I assume that the panelists are working from home. Over here in AECERT, we're working in premise. That's why you see me wearing a mask. It's actually required by law. So yes, working from home does allow, like businesses have to open some ports, business have to open some applications for the employees to be able to work from home. This is open up a lot of, like a huge can of worms of vulnerable applications or like misconfigurations of certain applications, since the time required for businesses to set up this infrastructure for employees is very short, which led to a lot of attacks in this time frame. And continuing to the phishing emails that we've mentioned in this panel discussion, one of the most dangerous phishing emails are internal phishing emails. When an attacker has managed to get into the system, or not exactly into the system by like the admin privilege, and just decides to send an email to another employee using another employee that he managed to phish. And this is the success rate of that email jumps up like really high, from 20% to like, let's say, close to 80%. I'm not sure if this number is correct, but it's really, really high. An employee can easily believe such an email that you received from a different employee.
Great, thank you. So, you know, what Abdul Rahman was saying there, and Nikolai as well, is, you know, some of these, you know, attack vectors and campaigns are still out there, whether it's phishing or RDP. So, Jamie, from your perspective, you know, what are the challenges to sort of be prepared against these kind of attacks and prevent, you know, any kind of successful attacks? You know, being a financial institution in the DIFC, what are some of the challenges that you're kind of facing?
Well, generally for us, obviously within the DIFC, we're a very small part of a global entity. So we have to leverage off of our resources within London, across the globe. We do have a retainer agreement with a security group in Japan on 60 minutes notice. So if anything is picked up, we can summon that team 24 hours a day, 365, and they can be implemented straight away. It's an extremely skillful team, probably a team that, you know, generally you wouldn't have within an organization. But essentially the key thing, it always revolves around preparedness, being ready, making sure that, you know, as Abdul Rahman said and Nikolai said, closing those loopholes, reducing the threat landscape that we're working from. You know, we have lots of requests from staff who may say, I need to get access to this certain web portal, and we even do, you know, like a web portal assessment before we even consider seeking an exceptional handling approval for that. So even some of the basic tasks within an organization of our size, it does come across to staff that we're quite, oh, this takes too long, why do you take so much time on that? But really what we're trying to do is we want to do as much checking as we can before we commit to anything. I must admit, I was extremely interested with Abdul Rahman's comments about an internal attack. I can't think of anything that's potentially more terrifying. It doesn't matter how much training you give people, because the training we present to people essentially based on internet or email usages. Do you know the sender? Does it look like a generic address? Is this a poorly formatted email? And we still get many questions because essentially for us being a global company, we deal with a lot of language barriers. So this morning I got an email in Japanese and I'm looking at it, contemplating, going,
well, I think we've lost Jamie there. He's frozen. Is everyone else still with me?
I think so.
Yep. Okay. I think Jamie's frozen. No problem. We'll move on from him once he comes back. So just I'll pose a question to you as well, Zainab, as well. What do you think the sort of challenges are for businesses? You know, whether it's small, medium, large, because there's such a spectrum within the DIFC. You know, what are the challenges for them in being prepared, and preventing successful cyber attacks?
Sure. I would say some of the main kind of common control gaps we've seen amongst some of our clients have been actually related to, firstly, backups, and secondly, actually just a visibility of their incidents. So through our experience, I mean, with backups, we do see companies backing up their critical data, but not protecting them or checking whether they're actually backing up regularly. And as a result, if the company is hit with anything, let's say ransomware, and the backups themselves become, encrypted or corrupted, the ransomware payment might not be able to be avoided, for example. And these things can be avoided by having the knowledge that your backups are intact and they're up to date. But we actually see a lot of companies failing to test them, that assumption that, we're taking the backups, therefore they're there, and not testing them in line with their disaster recovery plan. So that's a massive thing for us. We've seen kind of in the response element, where there's a hard and fast belief really that they're backing up periodically when they should be. Time during an incident, we've seen companies not be able to their backups effectively, or importantly, actually within the necessary time frame for some of their critical operations, and that's what I think has probably the largest effect on their kind of business operations. Something else we've been seeing specifically amongst SMEs or medium-sized enterprises has been limited visibility of their incidents. So we find that a lot of these companies don't actually log maybe 90% of what's happening on their network or their environment, and very few of them actually have aggregations of these logs in the same place. So when that limited visibility comes about, the issue with this, other than possibly a lack of accuracy of their own picture of what's happening on their own threat landscape, tends to be if an incident does actually occur, the incident response costs are immediately heightened, because you've got forensics then having to interact with every single system there that's affected, whereas if logs are aggregated in one place, it can be done quicker, more efficiently, and ultimately it is more economic for the victim company. So those have been two main things we've been seeing that are quite challenging within this space.
Great, thank you. And I think Jamie's back now. I can see him back on screen. Did you have anything to add to that, Jamie? Did you want to finish off what you were saying? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, apologies. I think I lost connection just a moment ago. I mean, essentially, essentially for us, I think I totally agree with Zainab. The key to testing doesn't just exist, and testing and training, it's not just for staff, it's for the internal teams within a systems department. You know, we have a dedicated team for servers, we have a dedicated team for our backup solution. But again, it's okay as long as you know that those systems are working, but to actually have that reassurance that they have been tested on a regular basis. I think it's just across the board. You know, we can't be complacent. We're always on a firm footing to make sure that tasks are assigned to various teams and that they are performing those, so that we have got that across the board approach. Even for the same as Nikolai was saying about some of the the gateways into an enterprise, making sure that configurations have been checked, on a regular basis, no loopholes have been left by a predecessor, etc., etc. From a global banking perspective, we have a very, very strict policy upon the leaving or departure of a team member that certain accounts have to be immediately withdrawn. The work has to be examined to make sure that any means of penetration can be removed. So we're very keen on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you. So just moving on to Nikolai, actually, one area that's quite close to my heart, obviously, is threat intelligence. So how do you think that kind of factors into what we're talking about today and understanding, who these e-crime groups are, and then what businesses can do with that threat intelligence, basically?
I think if threat intelligence is implemented correctly and utilized correctly in organization, it's really, really good data that you can react on, because this is real events or real data associated with events. So kind of if you see something that triggers your threat intelligence database and there's not too many false positives in your threat intelligence database, right, you can really prevent that specific event from happening. And obviously, as being on the defender side, you like to be able to prevent something from happening, right? I think one of the challenges you might have with threat intelligence is that when people come out, they kind of think of it as, I hate to bring up the word vaccine in these days, right? But they think of it as kind of like this one single antidote that they can get to any kind of cyber criminal activity, right? And if you think of it that way, then you end up with something which gives you way too many false positives, and you end up turning it off because it just becomes unmanageable. So it's better to have 50 super relevant indicators that you react to than having 5,000 where you get too many false positives. And that's why when you look at threat intelligence, curation is one of the really, really important elements of it. I think the threat intelligence service that the DFSA has offered to their clients, the whole initiative about that platform is phenomenal. It's one of the first of its kind in the UAE, and where AE-CERT is also contributing to it. We're extremely proud to be allowed to work on that specific platform and participate in some of that curation. But all credit goes to the people who's been actually driving this through to the DFSA members. And any of you here on the call today, if you're not already connected, I suggest that you connect on that platform, because it's a fantastic service.
Great, thank you, Nikolai. Do you have any comments on that, Abdul Rahman, about the DFSA TIP platform, being involved with that?
Yes, the MIST platform is really informative and useful for entities to contribute and share intel between each other. It's one of the most key success in defending your own environment. We do see some reluctancy from this certain entities that they might be a bit cautious of sharing such information, that to lead people believing that they are actually compromised. So in case of that, there is many different terms that they can use, like I observed a certain intel, or you're sharing it with the protocol of TLP, TLP red, TLP amber, TLP white, depending on the severity of the information you're sharing. If you have those protocols and terms in place, then you can be safe or more safe than in sharing such information with other entities, and letting them know, depending on what information you're sharing, how the severity of such information.
Great, thank you. So what I'll do now is we'll just sort of change tack a little bit and just start thinking about what we can recommend to the people on the line, the audience, kind of going forward. And one area I think, which is quite new to me, to be honest, is cyber insurance. So I'll give this question to Zainab. She's the expert in this field. But what is the role of insurance in cyber risk? And does cyber insurance always make sense?
Sure. I think it's a great question because, as you said, I think it is a new field. For a lot of organizations, it's a new field for the insurance industry as a whole. It's not been around nearly as long as, property insurance has, etc. And cyber risk is so unique, unlike other risks, that as we've, described probably for half the day today, it's constantly changing. Fire risk doesn't, change too much. Catastrophe risk changes, periodically, but nothing compared to cyber risk. So when we look at the role of insurance, by very nature, insurance is just the transfer of risk. Now, when a company goes through their cyber risk management journey, they'll go through the process and the pillars of risk management generally, which involves defining, analyzing their risks. They ultimately decide what risks they want to accept, what they want to avoid, what they want to mitigate, and what they want to transfer. So really the role of insurance in cyber risk has its place the same way acceptance, mitigation, and avoidance does. The key thing to note here is that cyber risk insurance is very different to other insurance policies. And I say that in terms of the toolkit it provides organizations. And so there's one takeaway I could give to everyone on the call today. It's that a cyber insurance policy is meant to effectively dovetail your incident response plan, the one you currently have. Now, why is that? Because cyber policies essentially provide a pre-agreed budget to companies for incident response costs. Now, they have pre-vetted specialist vendors written into the policy to assist in an incident. So that's everything from your forensic organizations, legal counsel, PR firms, etc., to assist in handling an incident. That's something that a lot of SMEs and mid-sized companies don't have the resource for, and I talk about that in time and money. A lot of companies don't have the time actually to go through this process of, really trying to find who the specialist vendors are, and the cost of them can actually be quite high. So when you look at an insurance policy, you're looking at it as a kind of well-oiled toolkit already to dovetail that incident response. And because the effect of data breaches, can compound rapidly with time is obviously of the essence. Having this kind of seamless response that can be backed up by insurance, where some of the costs are obviously shared with an insurance company, can be invaluable to companies where an incident can really, really dent their balance sheet. Just in case anyone's not familiar, but it is quite an extensive list. Cyber really covers the cost of forensic investigations, data recovery, ransom amounts, associated business interruption, income you're losing from your network being down to the to get your network back up and running, and legal advice just from a general privacy, regulatory, or security liability standpoint. So it's a really comprehensive policy. The following question is fantastic. Does it always make sense? It makes sense so long as it's not being considered a substitute for investing in cybersecurity and risk management, and it's looked at as a support system for when all the other controls kind of fail. The decision of whether and which insurance policy to purchase should really be part of your overall cyber risk management journey. It shouldn't be a substitute for any of those. But I do find that that's an important point to make, also because we find companies that begin their risk management journey, they look into identifying vulnerabilities within their system, they identify a risk and they want to mitigate it. But it might take up to 6 months, let's say, to mitigate that risk. That time frame can actually be exploited by malicious actors. And so sometimes it's important for entities to realize that security controls and solutions should go hand in hand with them looking into insurance, so that when a cyber incident, may actually occur due to that vulnerability that's found within the 6 months, they do have some of that transport support there. If that answers your question.
Yes, it definitely does. Very, very good. Just opening it up to the rest of the group, if you've got any comments on cyber insurance there. Jamie, is that something you consider?
From our point of view, we obviously have existing insurance policies that cover a lot of the points that Zainab raised. As I noted earlier, we do have an incident response team already engaged on a retainer agreement, so we see the value in that. Cyber insurance is definitely something we're looking at the moment. We have to understand, you know, our threat landscape as opposed to other banks at the moment. We're corporate banking. We don't operate a retail arm in anywhere except for Japan. So, you know, a lot of those attack vectors, ATMs or e-banking, e-commerce, etc., where we have a much smaller risk profile on. So we do see the benefit of it. It's something that we are looking into. We've got our team in London who's investigating that, and we definitely see there are benefits in taking that approach for the future.
Great, thank you. Nikolai, did you have any comments on that? I saw you nodding away there.
Yeah, I think the clients that we have that have been going through the process of getting covered by an insurance, I also think that the actual journey to get to the level where you can sign on that insurance is actually a very valuable process, in the sense that there's a risk assessment of the organization, there's a technical evaluation of the tools that you're utilizing, and you may be able to lower the premium by doing certain kind of things, and there's a lot of common sense in that specific process. So I think overall, it's not just getting the insurance and being able to sign on it, right? It's also the process that takes you there. And then I also have to say that it is having talked to insurance professionals in this specific space, right? It's a very, very difficult field to actually evaluate as an insurance company, right? They kind of know what the impact is of an 18-year-old guy who buys a 6-cylinder car and goes racing on a freeway. They kind of know which kind of risk is associated to this, and they probably have 40 years of data that they can use for that. For cybersecurity, it's so dynamic that I think right now that the value that you sign on is much bigger than what you pay for. So I think it's something that any organization should potentially look into.
And just to add to that as well, is cyber insurance actually raising the bar in the region, Zainab? Is it something that's kind of taking off here in the Middle East, or is it something we see just globally, or are people sort of getting into it?
I would say, as Nikolai's actually just said, it's no secret that the better your risk posture, the more kind of insurance options are available to you, probably at a better price. So for that reason, actually, cyber insurance is definitely raising the bar. We find that once a company has onboarded a policy, the following year they're looking to improve on certain elements within their cyber risk posture, whether that's just for premium relief or to avoid obviously a premium increase. Insurers are doing a number of things once they onboard their clients. Certain insurers have offerings where if you pay a certain level of premium, above a certain level, they'll provide awareness training to the boards. They can, assist in tabletop exercises, provide pre-loss cybersecurity solutions, either for free or discounted rates. So all around, as Nikolai said, the process of actually onboarding a policy and then actually engaging in it throughout the year kind of increases awareness all round within the different business units and the maturity of their clients. But in addition, I think what we're seeing this year particularly, and it's been most profound, I think, in the last 2 to 3 months, for new buyers of insurance, insurers are raising the bar as to what constitutes an insurable risk. So that's a risk that they deem is acceptable for them to take on. And it's very similar to the sprinkler issue within property insurance. So they're now extensively questioning companies' controls around ransomware, for example, and they have minimum controls that they require certain companies to have in place for them to onboard. But because of this, we're now seeing clients who don't look at cyber insurance as a luxury anymore, and they look at it as a necessity, having to implement things such as multi-factor authentication if they actually want to go ahead with buying a cyber policy. So kind of all around, insurers are pushing up, obviously, maturity levels of clients globally, but within the region, because we're a little bit behind in certain levels, we see those basic controls being stipulated by insurers that clients have to have in place. And by way of that, naturally, I think the posture is kind of slowly being edged upwards there.
Great, thank you, thank you. So I think just in the last 5 minutes or so, I just think if we could just sort of give people some recommendations on what they can kind of do now, in strengthening their security posture. And I'll go to Abdul Rahman for this. Are there sort of key recommendations that sort of AE Cert give to people on protecting themselves against cybercrime?
Yes, definitely. Like we mentioned, the MIST platform, threat intelligence sharing, it's one of the key factors of defending your environment. Awareness session, just like Zainab and Nikolai have mentioned, even Jamie. It's also important in helping strengthening the defense of your environment. And also, like the last thing that I can think of is group policies. So let me just give you an example to everyone who's connected to this. Imagine this is your asset. This laptop is your asset, and I'm your employee. If you allow me to have access to freely to the internet with using your asset, then you have to be very cautious on the attacks that you're going to receive. Group policies help you secure your assets and preventing internet access or ports or even misconfiguration from happening on your assets is one of the key success in defending your environment.
Great, thank you, Abdul Rahman. I think Mache is back with questions.
Yes, that's correct, Braden. I have actually two questions from our audience, and first question is related to cyber insurance, and maybe Zainab, you will be able to answer to this question. So the question is about a number of claims. Has the number of claims increased due to the COVID-19 pandemic? And can you share some insights? Of course, we are thinking here about claims related to cyber insurance.
Sure. At the moment, I think insurance companies are still gathering their claims information actually relating to COVID, but the number of incidents absolutely have gone up. We've seen kind of on two different aspects where the incidents have really increased, at least from an insurance perspective. Number one have been phishing emails related to anything COVID-19 related. So we're seeing a massive uptick in that, playing on, the human psychology at the moment of being actually quite worried about everything that's going on, new vaccine, new this, new that coming through. So we've absolutely seen an uptick in the number of phishing incidents arising. Something else we've seen has actually been any organizations that have been linked to any COVID-19 research, any funding for anything related to this. We've seen a lot of targeting of these kinds of information, of these kind of organizations. So yes, we've seen the number of the number of incidents increase, but I think it will be a while until we actually see the claims coming through in terms of what's being paid. But yeah, the two fundamental aspects we've seen have been phishing and of course ransomware, but I think that has been on the uptick, COVID or not, actually, but obviously they're able to play on many more people working remotely now. So
great, thank you very much. And we are running out of time, so the last question, and this question is to Abdul Rahman, but before I ask you, first I would like to thank AE Cert for all the efforts you made to raise cyber awareness. We as the DFSA receive a number of notifications from you that help us to protect our organization against this current cyber threats. And once again, thank you for that. So the question is it possible for regular DIFC firms to sign up for your newsletter or alerts, so companies can receive these alerts as we do?
Yes, definitely. I'll write down the email to which they can contact, and we'll definitely sign them up. We're even gonna be launching a new platform and releasing our notifications. So we will be taking those emails and then sending you notifications of how to register on our new platform. So definitely, I'll write it in the chat, and for anyone who's free, you can send us an email, and we'll be happy to provide.
Maybe also not worth noting, if you're signed up on the DFSA threat intelligence platform, then you actually already get at least the technical indicators of compromise that the AE cert is delivering. That's one of the data sources that we curate and embed for the DFSA entities on the platform.
Yes, that is very good point, Nikolai, and thank you for mentioning that. Okay, so it's time for our next presentation. Thank you very much for this insightful discussion and your answers to all these questions. If anyone else has more questions, please feel free to ask these questions using our question functionality. Our panelists will stay for a while to answer these questions. And right now, would you please join me in welcoming our next presenter, Patricio Hernandez, who is a Senior Vice President at MasterCard. Patricio heads commercial integration for cybersecurity acquisitions. He is responsible for developing and overseeing execution of go-to-market strategies for cybersecurity solutions and expanding MasterCard's business in cybersecurity globally. Patricio, over to you.
Yes, Macho, thank you. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'd like to share my screen. I'm hoping that you can see it. Are you able to see the slides I'm presenting? Macha?
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Perfect. Okay. Well, today I wanted to talk a little bit about the context in which MasterCard operates currently. You know, there was a time when our payment ecosystem, I could say, was well contained, where we needed to mind our business within the bounds of the payments industry within financial services companies. And of course, that has changed radically in the last 5 to 10 years. And now we operate in a much broader context in which we're no longer talking only about payments. We're really talking about secure interactions. We're talking about how we give and receive trust from our stakeholders, our consumers, our merchants, businesses, and governments that transact and trust in our ecosystem. And how do we keep pace, and what do we have to do? So first, I would like to say, you know, we founded this group of cyber and intelligence about 6-7 years ago, and it was out of, I think, necessity to recognize that we needed to go beyond our own frontiers. We needed to look into cyberspace, look beyond our environment, link up with more companies that were active in cybersecurity, more leadership, thought leadership exchange, and so on. So I think that's a context in which we operate today, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in the next few slides. So if you look at our history, you know, prior to 2010, and I think for 50 years, we used to talk about the four-party system. We used to talk about this neat, well-defined payment ecosystem where we have merchants on one side and consumers on the other, and the merchant banks and the consumer banks issuing cards. So, you know, the characteristics were where it's a physical network. Everything is very well-defined. We used to be very, very prescriptive, and we still are, in terms of how our customers connected to our network. You know, it was very physical infrastructure, not only from an acceptance point of view, you know, the points of sale that we have, but also in terms of the network, describing the hardware, the ports into which each company connected and how they connected. So that, I think, was, let's say, up to 2010, 2012. And again, you know, four-party physical infrastructure, and fraud and crime, I think, was contained. It was local in nature, and to some extent, it was predictable. You know, if you hadn't migrated away from magnetic stripe, if you were one of the countries or one of the players who had chosen not to invest yet, then you were more susceptible. So we used to see these corridors of fraud, and they came in predictable patterns, and they were local in nature. That changed, I would say, after 2010, going into 2011, 2012, we started seeing a real explosion of digital players. And that four-party system, which always welcomed third-party service providers, but they were well known. You know, there were processors, there were independent service and sales organizations. That really started exploding and expanding. And we saw many more cyber entities, many more ways to connect to the MasterCard payments network and to any other payments network. And this gave rise to more digital channels of interaction. And it included, you know, convenience, it included more use cases, but also more vulnerabilities. And cyber criminals started to exploit these vulnerabilities of digital channels that were emerging, and they were not well defined in terms of their security and interaction between players. And we also started to see the first scale attacks that went beyond borders, that in a very highly coordinated fashion, we had cyber criminals really for the first time getting into the systems of some banks or some processors and really manipulating you know, purchase controls, manipulating authorization systems. And the result of that was that we saw some significant scale attacks, POS and ATM cash attacks that were highly coordinated and required a response that went beyond business as usual. It was during this time that MasterCard created a safety net, a second layer of defense, which was watching the whole ecosystem globally and putting controls when controls from our issuers or acquirers failed. It has been a tremendous success, but it's an early example around 2014 of the type of solution that we were looking to implement. You know, having layers, having redundancy, and playing a more active role in securing the ecosystem, even stepping into roles that we hadn't stepped into before in a larger scale. And then, of course, we have now an evolving ecosystem in which that explosion of third party has just increased exponentially. And we have now, let's say, thousands of players. We can cite maybe three things. Of course, the rise of enterprise cloud computing, you know, the holy grail of our banks and issuers and acquirers used to be their data centers. It was unthinkable to outsource those, and of course now many of them are in the cloud. And we also have the rise of fintechs and open banking, so many more players involved in the equation, and of course a plethora of use cases that again increase convenience, increase our options to doing business, but also represent, let's say, more open windows and open doors that need to be secured. And not to mention, let's say, the Internet of Things and billions of devices now connected, and the expectations of consumers being that, you know, we can transact safely and we can trust the broader payments ecosystem because it's always been responsive and trusting. So a much steeper challenge, one that we have needed to, let's say, change our approach and go much broader and much deeper in many fronts that we were not really active in years past. So the context when we come to consumers and businesses and the implication for MasterCard is that we cannot really think about payments anymore. You know, we need to think about consumer journeys, business and shopping journeys as well. We need to think about our stakeholders and really protect every point, and not only protect it, but do it in a way that adds convenience, that adds, let's say, user experience, because, you know, consumers and other participants won't have it any other way. So payments now are embedded in our personal entertainment, and when we are interacting through social media, contextual payments, you know, all of these expectations, new channels, appliances. So when we look at, you know, all of these devices that are in the home, the expectations that we can indeed interact with them safely and transact with them safely. And that takes us then to a much broader arena in which we need to work in a coordinated fashion with many more players to ensure this happens, to ensure standards are set, to ensure we adhere to let's say, some sound cyber hygiene practices. And that's a context in which we operate today. It's no longer enough then to look, let's say, within our borders to have and be mindful of only our payments ecosystem. We need to go beyond every day, and we need to think holistically as we look into the future. So how do we do this? And we see three priorities that we need to be focused on. These three priorities are, I mean, we break them down into, let's say, one area which is about really growing our digital security, being able to do what we do in our payments ecosystem more consistently well, more consistently across geographies and across purchasing channels, so that we are able then to deploy our best technology for our existing ecosystem for consumers to transact safely, and do this in a smart way, so that we, let's say, for instance, we don't have to wait for the instant of a purchase transaction to deploy technologies that will authenticate a consumer, that will really recognize who you are and the trust that you have given to the system and that you should receive. So that's the context of growing what we already have and then building on top of it to really secure our payments ecosystem. We also need to expand and diversify into a broader context, into a cybersecurity environment, and hence, the acquisitions that MasterCard has conducted recently, the deployments of new platforms on a worldwide basis, where we are looking and monitoring much more space and many more players than we did in the past. We need to be able to do this consistently. We need to be able to influence and drive standards and drive behaviors that are not universally, let's say, understood or known, and therefore we need to be involved in a much broader arena, and we are. And then finally, being able to build that security foundation and export it to other types of transactions, to other types of payments ecosystem, real-time payments being a key part of where we're heading, and where we need to ensure that what we have learned over the past 55, 60 years in card payments, we're able to export it and adapt it and deploy it successfully in other payment rails, other types of transactions, ensuring that we have the same level of trust that we've been able to build collectively with our partners in the card space. So just to go a little bit deeper into each one of this, when we talk then about cyber, yes, we need to be able to secure the ecosystem, but we need to be able to protect cyber environments and go and work with other constituents to define standards that may not be there today. So for instance, when we talk about securing the ecosystem, deploying defenses across our network. So we have two salient examples.
I think we are experiencing small technical difficulties. Let me try to reconnect with Patricia. Before Patricia is back, I would like to say that we will be sending the email address that Abdul Rahman mentioned to all panelists via chat. You can, if you are interested in joining a CERT notification system, you can write an email. Also, you can join to our DFSA threat intelligence platform to receive similar notifications, similar information. We will be talking about threat intelligence platform in 10 minutes. Okay, and unfortunately, we are unable to reconnect with Patricia. So let's move on to the next part of our event. Next point on our agenda is the presentation from the DFSA on cyber risk. It's my pleasure to welcome my colleagues, Raif Al-Badivi, who is the head of cyber security at the DFSA. Raif will share some interesting tips on cybersecurity for small and medium entities. And Ken Cockhill, head of operational and technology risk supervision, who will present our cyber supervision program. I will also join my colleagues at the end to give you a quick update on the DFSA threat intelligence platform. Raif, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maciej. First of all, do you hear me well before I start?
Yes, we can hear you.
You do. Okay, thank you so much. So it's been a really insightful event. I'd first like to thank all the participants for sharing their knowledge and experience. I noticed the word dynamic has been mentioned throughout the presentations, which is actually really good because it coincides with my presentation topic to cover.
Excuse me, Raif. Yes. Sorry for interrupting. You are breaking a bit. If you could just repeat.
Okay. Is it any better now, Maciej?
Oh, yes, it's better.
Okay, sorry about that. So for the next few minutes, I'll be sharing my thoughts on how cyber risk is dynamic, how one entity could feel secure today, but not the following day, how it's constantly evolving, and I'd like to end it with a few tips for the small and medium-sized enterprises. So in this timeline, I've listed some of the key cybersecurity controls. We'll briefly explain how they came about, how some have become obsolete, and how it's constantly evolving. The point I'm trying to highlight here is most, if not all, of these controls were actually invented to fix particular problems or to reduce certain risks. And controls are constantly evolving, and that is due to the nature of cyber risk being so dynamic. For example, if we look at this, I've got it starting with a first commercial firewall that was probably invented to create barriers to separate public networks from private back in the days. Later on, antiviruses were introduced. It was to block.
Excuse me, Raif. I'm receiving information that unfortunately we can't hear you. Okay. If you like, you can maybe change your microphone.
Cool. Okay, is it any better now?
Yes, right now I can hear
you.
Okay,
sorry about that. Okay, so if we look at this timeline, it represents a timeline of security controls that were invented over time. If we look at the first commercial firewall, I was saying it was invented to create barriers to separate public networks from private. Antiviruses were then introduced to block and contain malicious software. Wi-Fi was introduced at a later stage to make our use of technology more convenient, and that also introduced, as we know, a series of challenges to protect and secure. So, moving on to the next generation firewall, traditional firewalls became obsolete over time, and they were not fit anymore. They got replaced with the next generation firewall, which introduced advanced technologies to detect, inspect, and understand traffic. I'll skip a couple here, move on to the SIEM, which stands for Security Information and Event Management. These technologies were invented to make sense of what was happening in an environment. It's designed to collect relevant data from controls such as the ones on the screen and make sense of what's happening. I won't go through each one of these in detail, so I'll skip a couple for the sake of time. And of course, what I have listed here is by no means all of the controls available. The list is extremely long, and with many yet to come, of course, in the future. So to simplify and to summarize, cyber risk is a dynamic in nature, as we said, and the main approach is most of what you've seen on the previous slide and most of these cyber controls, once put together, are there to help us make it difficult, like Ismail explained in his presentation, for an intruder to get in, or there to help buy time, simply. So buy time to spot an intruder and react before they hit home, as explained throughout these sessions today. So if you're an organization with mature cybersecurity controls, I'm sure you can relate to this. But if you're an SME who has not made a start yet or unsure on where and how to start, here are some tips for you. So most intrusions need a medium for it to happen, whether it's a website that someone breaks through, or a cloud application, an email account, or a smartphone. CSO Online suggests that in 2020, phishing attacks accounted for more than 80% of reported security incidents. That's a big percentage. Reports also from other specialists suggest that the percentage is even higher than 80%. So that clearly tells us, and it highlights the importance of email security and, equally user education, as also explained by my colleagues earlier on. So email security and user education to help protect and ensure that your last line of defense, your staff and colleagues, are prepared to deal with those. So if we move on to the SMEs, establishing a cybersecurity program can face many challenges, including cost, lack of expertise, and the complexity you may come across. My personal advice on this is, if you're an entity who's not made a start, then start with the basic. Start with the basic, the 80%. Start with email security. Ensure you filter out malicious files. Ensure you filter out executables. If you can, you should be able to. Talk to your service provider to explore how to advance your email security. Enabling two-factor authentication has been a key advice for 2020. It's highly recommended to enable two-factor authentication. It's also recommended to limit access to those who need it and review access periodically. And finally, educate your colleagues. Phishing simulations and user awareness are two main techniques to ensure your staff are prepared to defend your organization when technical controls fail. Ensuring your last line of defense are prepared has proven to be highly effective. In the DFSA, we conduct security awareness and phishing simulations. We do them regularly. We have a program where we reward colleagues with a cyber champion coin to make it encouraging. And we thank them for spotting and reporting phishing email. Here's a picture of me rewarding a colleague of mine for spotting a phishing email. Obviously, this was pre-COVID. And that was it from my side, I think. And thank you for your attention. And over to you, Ken.
Thanks, Rafe. I'll shift the discussion for just a few minutes to how we supervise firms in the context of cyber risk. So as we've been saying often, lately, we have significantly increased our supervision focus on cyber risk. First, we set out what our priorities would be. We increased our resources in this space, and we define what our approach is going to be. So I'll go through for a minute what that approach is and where we're focusing our attention when we're doing our reviews. The three areas that we look at: governance, hygiene, and resilience. And I'll go through each of these just a little bit one by one. First, around governance, we're looking at how well is the institution, how effective is the institution identifying, mitigating, and monitoring its risks. In particular, we're looking at what's the overall level of cybersecurity maturity within the institution, the board's understanding and awareness of IT and cyber risk, and how does that filter down to senior management, and what is their awareness and understanding of the risks, cyber risks that the firm is exposed to. What has the board set as its risk appetite, and what's been its process for setting its risk tolerance? What's the level and the type of management information in regard to cyber risk and IT risk that is making its way through senior management into the board? What policies and procedures are in place? We'll be looking at your outsourcing and risk management processes and your internal awareness. What programs do you have in place to build internal awareness and understanding among staff? Next, in the hygiene area, this is where we're focusing on the more technical aspects of your control environment, looking at the logical and physical access controls you have in place. What's your network security controls? What sort of change management and patch management processes do you have? Encryption, data security methods, data leakage prevention. What are you engaging in vulnerability assessments and penetration testing processes? And what sort of mobile device security do you have in place? Now, the third area of focus, and arguably the most important, Everyone is going to have different levels of hygiene, different levels of governance in place, depending on the nature and complexity of your business. Regardless of how sophisticated your controls are, as has been said several times during this session today, a cyber incident is a matter of when, not if. Everyone's going to some extent or another be a victim of an attack. If you aren't, then congratulations. But the most important area is to make sure that when it happens, you're prepared to respond to it. So the third area around resilience, we are looking at how well prepared are you prepared to respond, recover from an incident, and adapt to that incident going forward. So do you have a proper incident response plan in place? Have you tested that plan? Does that plan have communication plans within it? Does it have a process for post-incident review? What systems and backups do you have in place? Are you recognizing the difference between having a resiliency plan and a business continuity plan in place? It's one thing to be able to get your systems back online, but it's another to understand exactly how to respond to the potential impact that being down can cause. Dealing with your stakeholders, communicating to the public what your current status is, and then learning from that and adapting going forward. So what information do you have available to you? How are you gathering your threat information? How are you gathering information to make you prepared to respond, to proactively respond to threats that may turn into incidents? And in a few minutes, Matt J will talk a little bit more about how we're supporting this effort in the DIFC around threat intelligence in particular. Aside from these three areas, we've set our priorities. And our priorities for the next 12 to 24 months are improving the cyber awareness amongst institutions within the DIFC, supporting them in developing their cyber resilience capabilities, and promoting the sharing of information, particularly around threat intelligence. And we're doing all these things through firm-specific reviews, and some of you have been through these already. Thematic reviews. We did one large thematic review that we published the report this year, and over the next 12 to 24 months, there will be some smaller follow-ups to that, likely. And then through engagements, through roundtable discussions, workshops, and events like this. And before year end, we will be publishing a set of cyber risk guidelines for you to follow. So everything that I've just mentioned, this is just a very brief discussion of our approach to cyber risk supervision. You can find it on our website. We have posted the information now so that you can take a look at what our priorities are going to be for each year, and you can go through and see what our approach and our overall framework for cyber risk supervision is going to be. So now, let me pass on to Maciej. Maciej, if you want to take the screen and discuss how we're supporting threat information sharing.
Sure, yes, thank you, Ken. So I would like to tell you more about the DFSA Cyber Threat Intelligence Platform, TIP in short. I often hear the question, what is TIP exactly? So let me explain you what the TIP is and why we have launched it. So TIP is the first regions platform hosted by a financial regulator to share cyber threat intelligence. We made the platform available to all companies operating in or from Dubai International Financial Center. By using our platform, you can get information about current cyber threats, and you can use this information to secure your devices and network. Also, you can warn other members if you notice any cyber threat affecting your IT environment. It may be a cyber incident, malware, link to the fraudulent website, anything what can help others to protect themselves. The idea behind the tip is simple. We want to build a community of users that can act together to fight against cyber risk. Even if you represent a small entity having a really simple IT environment, you can also benefit from the intelligence shared on the platform. Also, we encourage you to share information about cyber incidents that may be helpful to others. What is important? We run our platform with support of a number of cybersecurity specialist entities, including both public and private entities. We have the same goal to strengthen cybersecurity within the DIFC. Our initiative is supported by the Dubai Electronic Security Center desk and the UAE Cyber Emergency Response Team ACERT. We appointed a cybersecurity specialist firm, Help AG, to manage the platform and to enrich threat intelligence shared by others. Also, Kaspersky, Palo Alto Networks, and Recorded Futures agreed to support the initiative by sharing their intelligence to the platform. And at this point, I would like to thank once again to all these entities for their invaluable contribution. Let me share with you some key stats to show how the platform has been used since day one. We launched the platform in January to facilitate the development of a community of information sharing. Since January, over 140 entities registered to the platform. Our partners and members of the platform share information on around 160 threads every week. Threads like ransomware, like phishing campaigns, this type of threads you can find on the platform. We organized a series of meetings with regulated firms to raise their cyber awareness, and a training workshop open to all the IFC institutions who are members of the platform to show them how to use the platform and how to integrate with it. We plan to have sessions like this in the future. What I want to stress is the platform is available at no cost, and we encourage all the IFC firms to join it and help us to strengthen the cybersecurity in the DIFC. But of course, there is one important question you may ask yourself: why should I join the platform? Let me tell you one, and let me show you the key benefits. So our view is that the cybersecurity is a shared responsibility involving both the private sector and the public sector. And cyber risk is everyone's problem. It doesn't matter how big or small the institution is. The financial services industry is highly interconnected. And a successful cyber attack on even the smallest entity can have a material impact on its clients and business partners. Cybersecurity is not a problem for any single institution or jurisdiction. It's everyone's problem. This platform by itself is not the solution to prevent cyber attacks. However, it may be useful to reduce the risk of already known threats. There are a number of benefits to sharing cyber threat intelligence, whether through intelligence sharing platforms, professional forums, or other information sharing communities. Firms that participate in threat intelligence sharing communities can improve their cyber response and remain up to date in their defenses by learning about emerging attack methods, and can stay one step ahead of cyber criminals. Moreover, sharing information with others help to determine how attackers may exploit industry-specific vulnerabilities. So given its importance, firms should consider information sharing as a significant factor in strengthening their cyber resilience. We encourage firms to register to the DFSA tip, join the platform, use the intelligence to protect your organization. Also, we encourage you to share information about cyber incidents to protect other entities. All DFSA regulated entities can register via the DFSA e-portal. Other DIFC entities can do that via email. Just write us an email at tip@dfsa.ae. So thank you very much for that. That was our presentation from DFSA. Before we move on, I would like to ask Patricio to finish his presentation. I think, Patricio, you are back with us. Patricia, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
All right. Can you see my screen?
No, I can't. You can share your presentation.
Okay, show my screen.
Okay, yes, I can see it.
All right. An apology to all of our audience members, some connection issues on my end. So I understand I got disconnected around this slide in which I talked about the 3 large areas in which we focus to be able to instill trust in our ecosystem and beyond. So the 3 areas of focus, just to recap very quickly, is basically to grow our existing security and trust in the ecosystem that we operate in payments, and not only do it while enhancing security, but also adding convenience and ease of use, so that the consumer journey and the experience it's evolving and it's advancing at the same time that security is keeping pace. So that's our first area of focus, our first challenge. The second one is really expanding beyond our domain, beyond our ecosystem, to go into cyber environment, work with third parties, coordinate, set standards, deploy solutions jointly with partners, and be able to then secure transactions beyond our environment to cyber environments. And then the last one is being able to replicate what we have done in cards, what we're doing in cards, really to new forms of transactions, new payment rails, new payment systems such as real-time payment. And all these areas are intertwined. We can't emphasize one at the expense of the other, because these three areas really need to excel in order to maintain and foster the level of trust that is required from businesses, from consumers, from governments to operate a successful interaction-based business or transaction-based business. So if I go a little bit deeper on each one of them, if you allow me, on the first point, the cyber, we really see 4 fronts. One is, what can we do to secure our ecosystem as it pertains to cyber threats, to defend ourselves against cyber attacks within our, let's say, within our ecosystem. Then, what can we do to help protect cyber environments, not only of our direct customers, but third parties that are associated with them? Then, who do we team up, industry-wise, regulators and beyond, to define the standards? And how do we set meaningful frameworks and venues to collaborate? How do we do that in a consistent, scalable way? So those are the 4 areas. And what I would say about the first one is, I talked to you about safety net, its significance, global second layer of protection for our transactions. And in terms of numbers, safety net is looking at 140, 150 attacks per day. And just to give you the magnitude of the things that safety net is working on, to date, as of October 31st, safety net had blocked over $7.5 billion of attempted attacks, really spanning over thousands of our members, or let's say our customers. And ThreatScan, it's a robot that is really assessing and detecting vulnerabilities in authorization systems of our issuers. And to date, as of end of October, had detected over 1,100 vulnerabilities from across the globe in over 150 banks and other customers. So we detect this proactively before they can be exploited, notify our customers and partners, and help them remedy those. So that's about securing the ecosystem. When we're talking about protecting environments, cyber environments, we recently launched what we call MasterCard CyberSecure. It's a new platform that combines a series of tools and automation techniques to really go beyond where we were before and be much more proactive about data compromise and cut it at its source. So now we're monitoring, whereas before we monitored thousands and tens of thousands of our customers, we're monitoring millions of merchants. As of this week, we're looking at about 10 million merchants and banks. That number will rise to over 20 million by end of year. So we're really keeping an eye through CyberSecure on the activity that spans from account data compromise, from early detection of PANs that may be compromised, to really looking at the security footprint and security internet posture, security posture of millions of our stakeholders. Defining the standards, we're very active with not only payment associations such as PCI and EMVCo and standard setting bodies, but beyond that, for nearly a decade, we've been very active in the W3C, the Worldwide Web Consortium. We've been very active in FIDO, the Fast Identity Online Alliance, and many other standard settings, because in cyber, the standards are not as tightly defined. It's really a wild west, so we really need to emphasize that. And then collaborating across industries, going beyond. And here, a few mentions, we do a lot of work with universities, with government, and with such institutions such as the Worldwide Economic Forum, where actually one of our leaders, Ajay Bala, who leads cyber and intelligence, is leading the Global Cyber Futures Council at the World Economic Forum. I think a couple of the speakers, or at least one of them, is a member of that council. We're working with Oxford University, MIT, you name it. So very actively involved in collaborating not only across industries but with government entities around the world. Just failed to mention that we launched ID theft protection globally and are getting more and more, let's say, deployment in collaboration with our issuers. When we talk about the second front, which is digital, you know, we adopted before the term was coined, or we really adopted this Carta approach to security, which really, you know, I mean, we did it before, and we do it on a consistent basis, which is continuous adaptive risk and trust assessment. So what we do nowadays is that way before a transaction begins, when an interaction and engagement, when a consumer starts a shopping journey, without invading their privacy, without interrupting their experience, we are collaborating with other stakeholders to really understand who we're dealing with, authenticate them online before a transaction is even attempted, be able to use, you know, factors such as biometric and you know, passive identity verification to ensure that at the moment of transaction we treat our customers in the best manner possible, at the same time that we treat fraudsters in the worst way possible by blocking them and really thwarting their attempts of attacking. So we have deployed what we call connected intelligence before, during, and after the transaction, and really we have done it in partnership with some of our stakeholders, and also by acquiring a number of assets in the last couple of years, such as new data, such as Brighterion, which is a company founded 25 years ago specializing in artificial intelligence, deep learning, and then Ethoca, another company that takes us to a different place in terms of disputes and chargebacks, really doing it in a much more agile and informed and economic way. So that's what we call before, during, and after the transaction, and it's geared to have a much better digital experience, much friendlier, but also much more secure. And finally, exporting all of these learnings into real-time banking, into open bank context, and into, yes, blockchain deployment. So some of this are at their inception, some of them more developed and now taking a lot of acceleration and traction across the world, real-time payments. But, you know, looking beyond just fraud, looking at financial crimes, you know, how do we control money laundering? How do we identify it? And how do we do this in an open and transparent way? So all of these learnings and beyond, really being able to apply it across payment rails in order, once again, to come back to the beginning, to foster, maintain, and grow trust in all of our digital interactions, not just payment transactions. So with that, I'll stop here and take some questions in case anybody in the audience has some.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for such an interesting presentation. Being conscious of time, I would like to ask our audience to ask questions using our question functionality. So Patricia will be able to respond via chat. And right now, I would like to invite Justin Baldaquino, our Managing Director of Supervision at the DFSA, for the closing remarks. Justin, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for the first DFSA Cyber Risk Forum, and a specific thanks to all our speakers for their valuable insights. Today, we heard some very useful insights on what types of cyber threats we are facing. We talked about actions we should be taking to prepare for and respond to those threats. The pandemic and digital transformation are impacting the threat landscape. The DFSA is addressing cyber risk by supporting institutions in developing their cyber maturity. Cyber risk is not going away, and it is something that will never be eliminated. A cyber incident is not a matter of if, but when. As you heard, the DFSA has implemented a number of cyber supervision initiatives to support our priorities and on improving awareness as well. We are supporting the continued development of cyber resilience within firms and promoting information sharing. Those initiatives, as well as the event that you're involved in today, demonstrates the attention to which the DFSA is giving cyber risk and DFSA's commitment to supporting institutions in the fight against cybercrime. As we heard today from Ismail from Mufg, where he spoke about resiliency and how resiliency is all about reacting quickly and ensuring that we're adaptable, which is a big part of all presentations that we heard from today. I'll leave you with one final thought, and that is mitigating cyber risk not only requires vigilance, it also requires collaboration. An attack that impacts one of us will threaten all of us in the future. So I'd like to thank everyone again for attending, and we hope to see you at our next cyber risk event. So thank you very much.